When a woman's body washes up on a Florida beach, no one is more shocked than the police.
I have never in my life seen anything like this before.
The Navy thinks her husband's best friend is the killer, but a psychic disagrees.
The man's innocent.
How many times can you say, it wasn't me, I didn't do anything?
A psychic connects with the dead.
He's going to kill him.
Will her message be enough to save an innocent man from life in prison? On the northeast coast of Florida, Jacksonville is home to the Mayport Naval Station, the third largest U.S. naval base in the world.
We live in a large military town, and we had 2 aircraft carriers, and you could tell when they were out to sea, that was 10,000 people gone from your population.
On the morning of March 26, 1988, 2 fishermen make a grisly discovery. They find a body washed up on the Intercoastal Waterway.
They thought it was a dolphin. They thought it was a fish that had washed up on the beach.
Dave Archer is a detective with the Atlantic Beach Police. When he arrives at the scene, he immediately knows this is no simple drowning.
I could tell it was that of a white female. Her hands were tied behind her back with a fishing stringer. And I thought, okay, that's odd.
She's identified as 22-year-old Anita Lucander. She had been reported missing by her co-workers at the Navy base 9 days earlier.
She was in my duty section, and she didn't show up for work. And in the Navy, you show up for work.
Peter Johnstone was a co-worker and a close friend of the Lucanders. When he'd realized Anita was missing, and knowing her husband was away at sea, he and fellow workers began a citywide search.
I mean, everybody, we all gotten worried. I mean, even the Navy had gotten hold of her husband, Bill, who was, I believe, down in Guantanamo Bay at the time.
My chief brought me down to the chief's mess and actually spent about 4 hours with me talking and settling me down. And I won't forget that night.
The autopsy suggests Anita's body had been in the water for 9 days. She was gagged with a white T-shirt. She had been strangled and her body had been mutilated.
I said, do you think she was raped? And he said, I can't tell. I said, what do you mean you can't tell? He said, all that's been surgically removed. And I thought, what?
The medical examiner also notes that her left ear had been cut off.
I told my boss, I said, look, I am entirely out of my league on this one. I have never in my life seen anything like this before.
Because of the shocking nature of the crime, they call in both state and federal law enforcement agencies, including the FBI.
Atlantic Beach at the time was a small town, a small police force. I don't think they were used to homicide investigations. And honestly, I don't think it was really taken seriously until Anita's body was found.
When investigators initially searched the Lucander home, the front door was unlocked.
There was no sign of forced entry. Just looked like a normal apartment. I'm thinking we got another missing military wife. You know, she's probably took off with somebody, or who knows.
3 days later, Anita's truck was found parked at a local bar just 4 miles from the house. When Bill Lucander arrives home from sea, he notices right away that something is wrong. Some of his guns are missing from his cabinet. Police immediately check pawn shops in the area, and one dealer says someone tried to sell him the stolen guns. A composite sketch of the suspect is made, but it leads nowhere and is filed away.
We started out with everybody was a suspect. In fact, the insurance company called me and said, we're fixing to pay off on the Lucander case, but we want to know if the husband is a suspect, because if he is, we're not going to pay. And I told him, I said, lady, at this point, he's the only one that's not a suspect, and the reason he's not is because he was out of the country.
A month later, a bizarre discovery. A mailman finds Anita's wallet. Sitting on top of it, a cold glass of water. No fingerprints are found on the wallet or the glass.
We took that as like a sign saying, okay, you guys are getting cold. You're heading in the wrong direction. You need to go back the other way.
The next day, Anita's purse is discovered blocks away from the Lucander home and on the same street as Bill's best friend, Peter Johnstone. Friends say that Johnstone spent a lot of time at the Lucander home, especially when his good friend Bill was away at sea.
Well, when Bill was gone, yeah, I would hang out over there. It wasn't not hardly as much as I did when Bill was there.
To investigators, Johnstone is beginning to look suspicious.
Every time you turn around, bam, Peter Johnstone standing right there looking at you. How's it going, guys? Is there anything I could do for you? No, we're on an active homicide investigation right now. There's nothing you can do for us unless you did it.
Peter takes 2 polygraph tests. The first is inconclusive. The second one he passes.
I never felt concerned that they were investigating me. I never felt concerned with that. Always anything I could do to help.
Peter remains a suspect, but with no new witnesses, no physical evidence, the police don't have enough to make a case.
Everything was circumstantial. There was no smoking gun. There was no fingerprint to say, this is this and this is that. Just couldn't do it.
9 months after Anita was murdered, police are still no closer to catching her killer.
We pretty much hit a dead end.
The Anita Lucander case goes cold. 7 years pass without a single lead, and Anita's brutal killer is still out there.
Between 1988 and 1995, I was very frustrated, angry. I was still basically living and working with the same group of folks, and pretty much realized that, there was probably somebody in that group that had killed Anita.
Then, in 1995, the Naval Criminal Investigation Services sets up a cold case unit, and the Anita Lucander case starts to warm up again. They go back to the original suspect list from 1989. At the top is Peter Johnstone, who is now married with 2 children and no longer in the Navy. 2 agents visit him in his home in Maryland.
They just want to ask me a few questions, and the case had been brought back up. And just in a split second, it turned ugly, and they said, "You did it. We know you did it. You're the one, and you better tell us now." And once again, I was just flabbergasted.
Investigators grilled Johnstone for a full 3 days. Now, in a dramatic turnaround, they believe they have the evidence they need to nail him. He's taken into custody and held for 30 days, until the Florida Duval County Grand Jury indicts the former Navy squadron member for the murder of Anita Lucander. Mimi Hannon, an investigator for the Public Defender's Office, is assigned the case.
We had a man that probably didn't commit this homicide, and it was our job to prove that.
For the defense, 7 years after the murder, it was going to be tough going. So breaking with convention, they turned to a psychic for help. But could a psychic's cryptic clues help save Peter Johnstone from life in prison? It's been 7 years since Anita Lucander's mutilated body washed up on the Intercoastal Waterway in Jacksonville, Florida. Her co-worker, former Navy Petty Officer Peter Johnstone, is charged with murdering his best friend's wife.
How many times can you say, it wasn't me, I didn't do anything?
There was no physical evidence really linking Peter to the crime. The only thing that linked him to Anita Lucander was his friendship with her, his business acquaintanceship with her, and his friendship with her husband.
Ann Finnell and Pat McGinnis are Peter Johnstone's public defense lawyers.
Perhaps Peter Johnstone was an easy person to focus in on because he was cooperative with them.
The most damning evidence the Navy had was a supposed verbal confession given by Peter Johnstone during their 3-day interrogation of him in Maryland.
After I was arrested, I spent 30 days in Maryland jail awaiting paperwork from Florida because I was arrested under a fugitive from justice for murder. And when I got to Florida is when I met my attorney, Pat McGinnis, and they said that I had confessed. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I didn't confess to anything. I kept telling them no for 2.5 days. And apparently they had this whole confession that they wrote up. Nothing I wrote up, nothing I signed, nothing I said, nothing.
The false confession that Peter ultimately gave was, basically, if I'd have done this, here's what I would have done.
Naval investigators contend that Peter Johnstone made advances to Anita, which she rejected. Angry, he strangles her, panics, and steals the guns from the cabinet to make it look like a burglary. He then dumps the guns and Anita Lucander's body off the bridge into the intercoastal waterway.
Most people don't believe that anyone would ever confess to something they didn't do. Those instances where interrogations last for long periods of time, the likelihood of a false confession is real. And in Peter Johnstone's case, this went on for 3 days.
Now it's up to the defense team to build a case for Peter Johnstone's innocence. Investigator Mimi Hannon's task is to go back 7 years to the original 1988 investigation.
Law enforcement in this case botched up an investigation tremendously. And it was a cold case, so you're going back and witnesses forget and people die and they move. And it's just really hard to reconstruct a real solid defense from something that happened so long ago.
To bolster their case, Hannon makes an unusual suggestion.
It occurred to me that law enforcement utilizes psychics. The government has utilized psychics. And back in the 90s, people weren't very forthcoming about using psychics to help them solve mysteries. When I first mentioned to Pat and Ann that I had a psychic friend and I would like to run the case by her and see if she had any feedback, they were very skeptical. Patrick almost did it, I felt, just to humor me. But I wasn't going to put my professional reputation on the line. I believed in Sharon's ability and was looking forward to using it.
Sharon Johns is a psychic who lives in Gainesville, Georgia. She says her psychic ability comes from a higher being.
I always pray to work from that highest level. And by doing that, the angels and the guides do come and stand with you because you're working in that light. I ask for extremely accurate information for those that I read for this day. When I get information, it just comes in words, just kind of quick words, or in a video, or just in kind of symbols.
Hannon and the psychic are friends, but they've never worked together until now.
I do all of my work over the phone because I prefer to be in my space. If I'm sitting beside a person, I have to move away from them. And I'm just more comfortable to do phone work. I don't care if the person lives next door. I'll say, no, call me on the phone. Because that way, my energy is more clear. Sure,
When Mimi calls Sharon Johns, she has no knowledge of the case and asks Mimi not to give her any.
She wanted to know the victim's name and date of birth and Peter's name and date of birth. And that's all I gave her.
Immediately before she could even get his name out, I said, the man's innocent.
She told me that Peter would be found innocent and that the jury would come back in with an acquittal in March.
When I look at different aspects of what's going on, things just come immediately. With this case, it was just like a TV reel, just taking place.
Then Sharon inexplicably hones in on a curious clue.
I keep getting this about a composite somewhere. And you really need to see if somebody can find it.
How could Sharon know about the 7-year-old long-lost composite, the sketch of the man who tried to sell the stolen guns? And why does she think it's so significant?
The composite had not been found yet. We had so many volumes of discovery to go through that we intentionally had to start searching through the discovery boxes. And we eventually did find it. It was there, just as she said. I came back to the office the next morning, and Pat wanted to know what the psychic said. And his eyes got big as saucers.
There were views she had about the case and expressed that we were quite frankly puzzled as to how she could have arrived at those without a more intimate knowledge of the case than she had.
We had Pat's attention. He was going to take her more seriously than he had.
Sharon Johns was suggestive that this was, in fact, the person who was Anita Lucander's killer.
And the composite picture doesn't look anything like Peter Johnstone.
When I first saw the police sketch of the composite, I I don't think it looked like me at all. One, I think the person had hair. And I'd like to show you some pictures of me back then. I haven't lost much hair since, in 20 years. And not to mention, I'm not wearing my glasses now, but back then I always wore glasses. So, without bumping into a wall, no, didn't look a lot like me at all.
As we began to work on the case and went further and further into things, then I saw more and more.
Patrick had asked me to ask Sharon a series of questions. He wanted them tape recorded so that it would be the exact words of Sharon Johns. During my conversation, her voice started to go from her own voice to the voice of somebody else.
As well as seeing visions, Sharon claims she is a channeler. It's a phenomena that allows spirits to communicate with the living.
It was really sort of a surprise to me, too, in that I wasn't really, what you're saying, preparing for this.
The voice was very high-pitched. It sounded like a little girl's voice.
He's going to kill me.
I don't know where Sharon went, but I was talking to somebody else.
Can a psychic channeling the voice of a dead woman help change the course of justice? A sailor accused of killing his best friend's wife is about to go on trial.
You did it. We know you did it. You gotta be kidding me.
When a psychic is asked to help on the case, she says he's innocent.
It's like I saw the whole thing just unfold, like a video.
And now, in one of her sessions, she claims to channel the voice of the murder victim, Anita Lucander.
She started talking in first person about the crime, and she walked me through the crime as it happened.
When I'm really into a trance channel, I am moved completely out of the way, to the point that I don't have any idea of what is being said. Mimi tells me that it was a high-pitched little voice. She sounded like a little child.
The voice sounded scared and frightened and had expressed that to me, that she was held for days, and he would leave her there alone for hours at a time, bound. And she knew that he was going to kill her. And I'll never forget the last words this voice said was, "And then it was done." And I took that to mean, and then he killed me. I'd never been a part of something like that before. So at that point, I went over to jail, and I pulled Peter out. And I said, Peter, what's did Anita sound like? And he said, you couldn't mistake her voice. She sounded just like a little girl.
It's like she is the one that showed me herself in that chat that she was in. And by her coming through and actually speaking was amazing, in that the people that were listening to it heard it, but the recording didn't record it.
There was nothing on it but static, and there was a lot of distortion on the tape.
If the psychic's revelations are accurate, Anita was held captive for several days before being tossed into the waterway. And if this is true, the prosecution's contention that her body had been in the water 9 days must be false.
When we looked at the autopsy results and the photographs, both Mr. McGinnis and I were very suspicious of the body having been in the water for that full 9-day period. And the reason being is that in the intercoastal waterway, even in March, there's a lot of crab activity.
To prove their theory, the defense team order a crab test at the same location where Anita's body was found. In the experiment, raw chicken is used in place of human flesh and is placed at the bottom of the river for 9 days.
While that body is on the bottom especially, it would be attacked by crabs and other animals that are in the water as well. This body had none of that kind of activity.
If crabs didn't ravage Anita's body, it could only mean that she was not in the waterway for the full 9 days. This contradicts the Navy's contention that Peter killed Anita and dumped her body that same night. It makes the so-called confession meaningless and amazingly vindicates the word of a psychic. February 18th, 1997. Almost 9 years after Anita Lucander's brutal murder, Peter Johnstone goes on trial.
Peter was definitely fearful facing trial because he was looking at a life sentence. He had been behind bars for almost 20 months by the time it had gone to trial.
But just as the trial gets underway, the psychic makes an unusual request.
Mimi called me and she says, is there anything else that we need to do? We're going to trial. I said, just be sure that you've got that composite. I said, it's very important. I don't know why, but you've got to take it.
We had no idea where she was going with that and what the significance would be.
Anne Fennell enters the composite sketch into evidence, and it will prove to be pivotal.
Trials don't always end up like you want them to end up. It is an incredible nerve-wracking experience, much more so than if you're going to trial with someone who you either know or think is guilty.
After a 3-week trial, the jury begins their deliberations. Just 2 hours in, the jury requests to see the composite sketch of the man who pawned the guns once again.
And we found out there was one holdout in that jury room who wanted to take a closer look at Peter Johnstone.
1 hour later, the jury reaches a verdict.
My heart was, coming out of my chest, and you're just sitting there, and the judge takes a piece of paper, and he reads it, and I'm like, okay. And then he folds it back up, and he hands it back.
It was a real nail-biter for a few minutes until the jury was seated and the clerk read the verdict.
With the jury found the defendant not guilty.
A not guilty verdict in the death of his best friend's wife, Anita Lucander, who was raped, strangled, and mutilated in 1988. On March 17, 1997, just as the psychic predicted, Peter Johnstone walked out of the Jacksonville courtroom a free man. How did the psychic know so much? She said that the key to Peter's defense lay in the composite sketch. She predicted that he would be free in March, and she correctly predicted that Anita had not been thrown straight into the water after the murder, as the prosecution stated.
Sharon's contribution to the case had become huge. She invigorated the defense team. We were on a certain defense theories. That was what Sharon was seeing too.
It got him looking at other avenues and justifying what she had said. It was great. So I think good chance she saved my life.
Today, 21 years after Anita Lucander was murdered, Sharon Johns and Peter Johnstone meet for the first time.
You look good. You look good. It has. Oh. It's so, you're welcome. You're welcome. Oh. Doing this work is a big responsibility. I have simply just learned to trust. And what I see, I give. I can't give them any more than what I see or what I hear.
To date, the cold-blooded killer of Anita Lucander has never been brought to justice.
She was my wife. She's a daughter. She was a sister, an aunt, and there's only really one person that knows what happened to Anita, and that person needs to come forward and put this to rest. And if he's not man enough to do that, personally, I hope his life's a living hell.
A lazy summer day at the lake turns to panic
I said, "Where's Tom?"
when a 5-year-old boy disappears.
I wondered if he was dead.
Police think he's drowned, but a local psychic says he's lost in the forest.
I could see this little boy lying under a very large tree.
Is the psychic right? Is Tommy Kennedy alive or dead? Empire Lake in picturesque upstate New York, a favorite spot to spend a summer afternoon, especially in the mid-70s.
It was a place where people could go and relax or bring their picnic lunches and have a nice time.
But for Mary Kennedy, Empire Lake brings back memories of a day she will never forget. On a hot summer day in 1975, Mary Kennedy and her family head to Empire Lake to spend the day swimming.
My fiance and his 2 daughters, Siri and Lisa, and my 2 sons, Ben and Tom, we decided to go down to the lake and give the children a chance to cool off.
After swimming, Fred takes the kids for a nature walk.
It was all 4 of the children. I really don't remember why I didn't go.
Fred and the kids disappear into the woods.
While everyone was hiking, I was lying on the blanket, enjoying the day. Knowing me, I probably had a book with me.
But that enjoyment was about to end.
I see Fred and the children coming towards me. Everybody was sweaty and happy, and I don't see Tom.
Tommy is Mary's youngest son. He's 5 years old.
I felt a moment of panic. Fred comes up to me and I say, "Where's Tom?" And Fred says, "I sent him back to you."
Fred says Tom wasn't wearing shoes, and he complained his feet were hurting.
I sent him back to you just at the beginning of our trip. He was whiny and didn't seem to want to do the walk, and so I sent him back to you. He thought that Tom was more competent than he was. I would not have done that. Oh my God. Where's my child?
Mom! Help me! Where's everyone?
I remember just jumping up and starting to run around the lake, screaming for him.
They search frantically, backtracking their walk. Perhaps he's just hiding.
He was like a little imp, liked to play tricks on people, or always busy doing something, building tree houses, exploring the fields. He was delightful.
But after 2 hours, no sign of Tommy. To add to their concern, a thunderstorm is moving in. They realize it's time to call the police.
By the time I arrived, Tommy had probably been missing 2 or 3 hours. It was probably somewhere around 4 or 5 o'clock by that time.
Dave Redsiger was a member of the local emergency squad in Spencer.
What we did was contacted all the surrounding fire departments.
I remember standing there and seeing the emergency vehicles beginning to arrive right down on the lawn. You know, they just bypassed the parking lot and they were setting up a command center down there on the lawn. It seemed like every car had a 2-way radio going.
He's wearing a white t-shirt and a pair of plaid shorts.
I remember just regular people beginning to arrive. People standing in groups and being briefed and being told where to go.
Nobody seemed to see him around the campsite. Nobody seen him around the swim area. So you kind of narrow it down to 2 areas, the woods or the lake.
I'd look over and they're bringing boats in. And that only means one thing.
A dive team goes into the water to search for Tommy.
near the camping area was heavily dead woods, a lot of stumps, things that, if somebody got in there, they could very easily get entangled underneath the water and not be able to get back to the surface.
And I was just horrified. I was absolutely horrified. And I just wouldn't look at them. Absolutely didn't want to look at them.
The dive team searches the perimeter of the lake, but no sign of Tommy. The storm is getting worse.
Once the weather started to get bad and the lightning started getting pretty nasty, we had to call off the water search.
4 hours had passed since 5-year-old Tom went missing.
And by that time, it was pouring. It was just torrential. And I'm thinking about this little 5-year-old kid with a bathing suit on, out there in the cold rain, in the woods somewhere. And I'm just so scared for him.
8 miles away, in the town of Spencer, 25-year-old psychic Phil Jordan hears the news.
I ran across the backyard, and my landlord was standing in the back door, and she said a little boy was missing up at Empire Lake. She says they think he's in the lake and that he is drowned.
But out of nowhere, the psychic has a vision. He can see little Tommy.
I could see this little boy lying under a very large tree. That showed me that he was probably in the woods and probably not in the lake.
Is Tommy Kennedy still alive, lost in the woods? Is the psychic right? And will anyone listen? In upstate New York, a massive search is underway at Empire Lake for 5-year-old Tommy Kennedy, who vanished during a family picnic.
This little 5-year-old kid, Tommy! Out there in the cold rain. And I'm just so scared for him.
The storm gets worse and day turns to night.
We really started getting some nasty storm weather coming in, and it blew in quite heavy. A lot of rain. And of course with that we got a lot of thunder and lightning, and it got quite cold.
The missing boy's father, Don Kennedy, a local reporter, arrives 8 hours after his son disappeared.
He had been out of town, and he had rushed to the lake.
Don begins frantically searching for his son, but now there's a new danger.
With the lightning and the thunder, we were really afraid of ending up with, more searchers lost besides the boy.
Redsicker has no choice. He calls off the search.
Intellectually I understood, but my little 5-year-old is out there still by himself.
Tommy's parents are desperate. Don Kennedy remembers a piece he'd written about a local psychic. By coincidence, it's Phil Jordan.
My 5-year-old child was lost. As far as I was concerned, bring in the National Guard. Bring in anyone who will help search for him and find him.
I was not surprised that he called me. I felt that I might hear from some of the family. He was really pleading. He wanted me to come up to the lake at that time.
The psychic says he can help to find the missing boy, but not just yet.
I just knew that if I went there, I would become contaminated with everyone else's ideas and not follow my own self, my own psychic self. I remember saying to Don Kennedy, I'm really sorry, but I just can't come right now. I have to wait till daylight because I don't want to miss a clue that could help us to find him.
With the search called off, and the psychic refusing to come to the lake until daybreak, Mary Kennedy is losing hope.
I'm wondering if he's cold, wondering if he's scared. I wondered if he was dead.
But back in Spencer, psychic Phil Jordan is already on the case.
I sometimes leaf through the Bible and just point to something. And there was a phrase, and it said something about the children going into the woods.
Suddenly, the psychic has a vision of exactly where to find Tommy. Although he's never been to Empire Lake, he begins to draw a map.
The first thing I knew was that down to my left there would be 3 boats. And then I could see the building across the lake. And I knew I would have to go into the woods behind the building till we find a clearing. So I drew that all on the map.
But can this crudely drawn map lead to Tommy Kennedy? It's 5 a.m. The storm is over. Tommy Kennedy has been missing an agonizing 16 hours.
No parent should have to spend a night like that. I don't remember whether we ate supper, what we said to each other. It's blank.
Hundreds of volunteers from miles around gather at dawn to resume the search.
There were several fire trucks with personnel on them, at least 1 ambulance. We got the people together, told them what the boy's name was, and then had them search areas around the lake into the wooded areas, but we concentrated on the area immediately around the camping area and the bathing, swimming area.
I was just tremendously grateful that all these people just showed up.
Psychic Phil Jordan also arrives at the lake to help with the search.
I met Dave Redsicker, who was a friend of mine, but was the investigator in charge. Even I says, well, I have this map.
I was shocked. As simple as the map was, the things that he had drawn on the map were right there.
The 3 boats were there, exactly as I had drawn. And across, you could see a large tent. And I said, that has to be the building. We'll go in behind the tent.
But the searchers think he's wrong.
And what he was describing was an area that we hadn't searched yet, because it was an area that we figured was the most remote area, or most unlikely area that this child would have gotten into.
But the psychic is confident his map will lead to the lost boy. Before he begins his search, the psychic makes an unusual request.
He asked me for an article of clothing that belonged to Tom. So I asked Phil Jordan if one of his little sneakers would be okay, and Phil said, absolutely.
His mom made sure I had that sneaker, and I tucked that into my belt, and I focused on Tommy Kennedy and finding him.
250 rescuers searched the south side of Empire Lake, the area closest to the spot where Tommy was last seen. Meanwhile, Phil Jordan and 2 volunteers, armed only with a psychic map and a little boy's shoe, head in the opposite direction.
There was myself and these 2 men that I didn't know.
I just wished them good luck, and they headed out into the woods.
25-year-old Phil Jordan has never tested his psychic powers in a life-and-death situation before, and he's never been to Empire Lake. But he has faith in his map.
I know we're going to find him, and we will find him within an hour.
Tommy!
Every little ways I would stop, and I'd say to myself, okay, we have to keep going straight. Now we have to turn left.
Tommy!
Now we have to go up here. We have to go a little bit to the right. And I remember talking to myself through the whole thing so I could block out any of the ideas that others had.
Tommy!
It was rugged terrain. There was a hiking path, but it was uphill. A lot of woods, a lot of trees falling across the path, and treacherous going.
Is it possible that a 5-year-old without shoes could have strayed so far? The psychic is now deep in the woods, 2 miles from where Tommy Kennedy disappeared. And so far, the psychic has turned up nothing. And now, one of the 2 men with him is starting to have doubts.
One of them kept saying, everything you're describing is in another direction.
Tommy Kennedy! Tommy!
Yet hundreds of volunteers searching in the area where he should be can't find a trace of Tommy either.
Nothing. It was as if Tom had just vanished.
The psychic struggles to keep his vision.
And that's when I would refer to the map and hold on to his sneaker and say, Tommy, I'm coming, I'm going to find you.
But now even the psychic starts to doubt his map.
I was all ready to say, well, maybe we should check that other area and come back here later today.
And then Phil Jordan makes a startling discovery. On the shores of Empire Lake in upstate New York, Mary Kennedy waits desperately for any news of her 5-year-old son Tommy, who's been missing for over 16 hours.
It was as if Tom had just vanished.
Hundreds of searchers comb the area around the lake where the boy disappeared, but with no luck. Yet 2 miles away, psychic Phil Jordan, following his crude map, has stumbled across a child's footprint.
It was right in front of me. I looked at that footprint and I thought, oh, we must be close, and I got goosebumps, you know.
That footprint convinces the psychic he's on the right track.
I said to the other searchers, now we have to find a clearing. It shouldn't be too far up here. So we continued on, and within moments we found the clearing. I just stood at the opening of the clearing and said to myself, okay, now which way do I have to go? I looked at it sort of as a clock, and I thought, we've got to go where the 11 is. And we went to that area, and there was another path through the woods.
As he climbs a gully, Phil falls behind the other searchers, but he can still hear them calling out Tommy's name. And then, an answer.
Help me! I'm over here!
I woke up to the sound of people calling my name.
Tommy! Tommy!
I started screaming, I'm over here, I'm over here.
The fellow who tried to talk me into going in the other direction, he says, I hear him yelling. He's yelling for help. And so they all ran in the direction that the voice came from.
I saw these men coming towards me with huge smiles on their face. I was very relieved that they had found me. Everybody was giving Phil Jordan congratulations. I could tell right away that he was the one that was responsible for locating me.
I just dropped there and knelt there and thanked God that he had given me this ability and cried. You know, I just sobbed. It was very emotional. He was worried that he had done wrong. He was worried that he was going to be reprimanded. And it was quite the opposite. Everybody was so thankful.
Tommy Kennedy had been missing more than 16 hours. One of the searchers reminds Phil about a prediction he had made.
He says, 58 minutes. And I says, what does that mean? And he says, you told me we'd find him within an hour, and it was 58 minutes after we started.
Tommy's rescuers carry him out to a nearby road.
They had walkie-talkies, and they radioed for help, and soon the ambulance came to a road that was not far from where Tommy actually was.
And the news that Tommy is safe is radioed back to the lake.
Someone comes up to me and tells me that Tom has been found. It's like heaven opened up. I was just so grateful. Then almost instantly, there he is.
After almost 2 days of anguish, mother and son are reunited.
He says, I was camping, Mom. I slept next to a stick. It's a miracle. It's a miracle that he's found, and it's a miracle that he's okay.
Phil Jordan's visions had been right from the beginning. Tommy Kennedy hadn't gone near the lake. Instead, he had wandered deep into the forest.
I immediately started crying and whining as I was walking back, and I'm sure that contributed to me getting lost. I probably wasn't paying attention to the marks on the path. I just started running in circles, and within a very short period of time, the clouds rolled in. And that first lightning bolt came down, Then I was terrified, and I started running and running and running.
Wet, scared, and exhausted, he remembered what his mother had taught him.
I taught my children standard safety, which is you don't go near the water when there's lightning. Find a sheltered place.
I came upon a sort of a clearing, and I found a nice large stick to fend off any attacking animals.
Phil had marked just such a clearing on his map.
I was completely exhausted by that time, so I didn't have any trouble at all falling asleep.
How could a psychic with a crudely drawn map succeed where 250 rescuers failed?
If it hadn't been for Phil, and his map and his abilities, we either wouldn't have found him for a long time or we may not have found him at all.
I'm certain that Phil Jordan saved Tom's life.
Word that Phil Jordan had found a lost boy using his psychic abilities is big news. Even the local sheriff, who is not in the habit of using the paranormal, recognizes his achievement.
And he says, I would like you to become deputized so that if we have other cases, you can work more freely with law enforcement.
So help me God.
At that time, Phil was the only deputized psychic that I was aware of in New York State.
Phil Jordan's amazing accomplishment at Empire Lake paved the way for psychics all over America to team up with police in solving difficult cases.
It was truly an honor to be deputized because at that time in history, psychics were just beginning to be used a little bit in police work.
It's now 32 years since psychic Phil Jordan found little Tommy Kennedy lost in the woods. They haven't seen each other since. Until today.
Good to see you. Well,
Phil still has the shoe that helped him to find Tommy so long ago.
I put it in my belt, and I'd say, okay, Tommy, tell me where you are. Do you remember that day?
I do. I remember running through the woods. I remember the lightning. I remember finding a stick to sleep with.
Seeing
I remember.
a wild bear.
Exactly. Yeah, like my 5-year-old with a stick is going to do something to a bear.
That's right.
But
well, you were using your head.
Yeah.
That's the best way you knew how.
Right. Yeah. And the next thing I remember is hearing you guys. I heard you calling for me and waking up.
It was that day that I proved my ability to myself. And from then on, no one's ever convinced me that I can't do what I do.
Without him, they might have been looking for my bones,
It's the summer of '79, and someone is sexually assaulting young women in a Virginia college town.
We concluded that we had a serial rapist. People were scared to death.
Investigators have little to go on.
We were desperate. We wanted any help we could get.
Under the gun to solve the case, the police turn to a psychic.
This rapist is apologizing to me.
There's obviously some powers at work there.
Oh my gosh, well, what are we into?
Will the psychic help the police to stop a serial rapist before he becomes a serial murderer? Stanton, Virginia, a small, sleepy southern town nestled in the Shenandoah Valley, the birthplace of Woodrow Wilson, the 28th President of the United States.
It was a city of 25,000, but it was sort of caught in time.
But on the evening of March 14th, 1979, Stanton's peace is shattered. A knife-wielding rapist attacks a 22-year-old student in her room at the local college. It is the first in what would be a string of violent sexual assaults.
Stanton Police Department. I just remember getting the call, and
The lady was very hysterical and upset, which, of course, anyone would have been going through that. I just remember how I felt so scared and helpless. My main thing was to try to keep her calm until a police officer could arrive.
Detective Ronnie Wiseman is put on the case.
Our first rape was very unusual because we had very few rapes at all. And this one seemed to be rape from a stranger.
All police have to go on is a composite drawing of the assailant based on the victim's vague description. Then, 2.5 months later, a second rape, only blocks away from the college. Again, few clues for the police.
Person came in a window on each one. He used a knife, and he had a stocking mask on. And so our best description was height and weight. Race. Was about it.
Both victims described their attacker as a large African American. But because of the mask, they can't see his features and he leaves few clues. Ray Robertson is the prosecutor for the city of Stanton.
Back in 1979, we didn't have DNA evidence. Any foreign hairs, any semen, any saliva, anything like that we found on them, we could get the DNA on that now. We couldn't do that back in 1979, and so it's a very different game when it comes to solving crimes now from what it was back then.
We just had no evidence.
With a violent rapist on the loose, the whole town is on edge.
For something like that to happen around here was a really big deal. That kind of stuff just didn't happen in Stanton. It made me be much more aware. Any place I went, I was always checking, being more cautious.
During that particular time, women were kind of afraid to walk streets at night alone, especially in the college area. All the windows were down and locked.
In a town where serious crime is all but unheard of, the pressure on local police for results is immense.
The community was actually in pretty much of an uproar.
I was following the news in the newspaper daily, especially on this case, because there was so much turmoil. I would say, wow, I don't envy the police officers that's working this case because it's got to be tough.
Everyone that you would come in contact with, regardless of what you were doing, wanted to know how the case was going.
Then, driving by a construction site, the victim of one of the rapes spots the man she thinks attacked her.
One of the victims said, that's him. That's him. There's no question about it.
Police arrest the man, but they soon realize the case against him is flimsy.
The guy wore a stocking mask. How can you make an identification of a suspect that has a stocking mask on?
I think everyone knew that it was not right.
He had been convicted of minor offenses that were very different from the type of offenses that a rapist usually commits, and I really didn't think he had done it.
No sooner is the first suspect released than the other rape victim names a different man. A man she vaguely knows, and he too is arrested.
He actually flunked a polygraph test, so on the basis of the victim identification and the polygraph results, he was arrested.
Everyone seemed to say, oh boy, we got the guy. We can relax a little bit.
But the police don't relax for long. Less than a month later, a third attack, just like the first two. Wearing a stocking mask and wielding a knife, a man climbs through a window and rapes a 32-year-old woman. All this while the investigators' prime suspect is behind bars.
The second person that was arrested was in jail when the third incident happened. Really didn't think we had two people doing these acts.
The suspect is released.
It's very sad. The police were scrambling to get an arrest in the case.
Women were on edge, and we were getting a little frustrated and maybe a little antsy, too, to solve some of these things.
With 3 identical attacks, police believe, unless stopped, the man will almost certainly rape again.
We realized after about 2 or 3, we had a serial rapist. This is something that was very new. We'd never had anything like this.
Under intense pressure, Detective Wiseman calls in Special Agent Darrell Stillwell of the State Police.
You had a person that was operating within about a 5-block area. There were all types of sightings, window peepings, entries into houses, burglaries, thefts of small items.
The perpetrator's rapid escalation from petty burglary to violent rape makes police fear what he'll do next.
The possibility that something will go down, a resistance that will cause a homicide. There's always the possibility of that.
Then, 6 months after the rapes began, a chance event changes the whole course of the investigation. Psychic Noreen Rainier arrives in town to give a talk at the local college about ESP and the paranormal.
I had been teaching at Blue Ridge Community College, and at the very end of my lecture, a young lady stood up in the audience and asked me if I would do a public service. I said yes, and she told me that there had been a rapist in the town, and her sister had been one of the victims, and if I could hold her ring and see if I picked up anything.
Noreen uses psychometry, a common psychic technique.
It seems that object has memory or goes beyond memory, and I can see images in my head.
Noreen holds the victim's ring while the student records her response.
And I remember holding it and picking up several pieces of information that came into my mind. She had a tape recorder and was taping it.
Despite knowing nothing about the case, Noreen immediately connects with the horror that is gripping the town.
I felt this small, peaceful, beautiful community was terrorized, certainly the women, because of this rapist attacking again and again.
Noreen also claims to see details of the actual crime.
I remember seeing a stocking mask over...
Desperate to see her sister's attacker brought to justice, the student takes the tape recording of the psychic to the police.
Stocking mask.
The cops are doubtful at first, but agree to listen to the tape. Like the student, they are impressed with what Noreen has to say.
Noreen told us this guy had used a stocking mask and a knife in all his rapes. All the things that the victim had told us that never were reported in the media.
Well, we were sort of in disbelief. How does she know this? Because these things weren't out.
On September 2nd, a fourth woman is raped. The victim, a young woman who was babysitting for friends. And then, a few weeks later, the rapist, wearing his trademark stocking mask, strikes again, this time a 23-year-old woman.
The public image of the Stanton Police Department plummeted. It was a worst-case scenario.
With the attacks becoming more frequent and more brazen, the cops are willing to try anything, even a psychic.
We were desperate. We wanted any help we could get.
Dabbling in the paranormal to solve a crime is not conventional police procedure.
We had no idea what we were getting into, and it was very new.
I think that when the police first agreed to work with me, they had no clues, and he kept raping, and they had no information, so they thought, what do we have to lose?
Can a psychic working with detectives help to track down a sexual predator before serial rape turns to murder?
And we looked at each other and thought, oh my gosh, well, what are we into?
In the summer of 1979, a violent sexual predator is haunting Stanton, Virginia.
We concluded that we had a serial rapist.
5 violent rapes have been committed by a mysterious masked man carrying a knife. With few leads, the police have all but hit a wall.
The public image of the Stanton Police Department plummeted. It was a worst-case scenario.
In desperation, the detectives turn to psychic Noreen Rainier, who has offered to help.
I was just nervous. I had never worked for the police before.
Today, Noreen Rainier is one of America's best-known psychics. But before Stanton, she had never worked with the police.
So my own concern was, will my mind be able to do what they want?
The first thing investigators do is take Noreen to the home of the third victim, the sister of the student Noreen had met.
We just let her go. Didn't say a word like, yeah, you're right, or no, you're wrong, or anything.
We didn't chat. We just went, hello, hello, and I started working.
We took Noreen to this house. About halfway up the steps, she said he came in that window right there.
The rapist had climbed into the window and had touched the banister.
Noreen's vision uncannily matches what the investigators already believe.
We found a ladder laying in the yard, and we came to determine that the person went in a upstairs side window. These things had never gotten out.
How could the psychic know something that hadn't been released to the public and the media?
When he opened the window, in order to get in, he just had to sort of jump to the banister.
That banister had given police the one hard piece of physical evidence they have.
I'd gotten a real good palm print where he had to grab the banister.
Walking through the home, Noreen's paranormal visions of the attack come thick and fast.
He was already waiting for her when she got home. They said, show us.
She pointed to a room and said he was waiting back in that room for the victim to come home. That was true also. Before she got to the bedroom, she said, there's some violent activity up here.
They looked at each other, but they didn't say anything. And then we walked in.
She walked in the bedroom and sat down on the bed, and she started talking as if she were the victim.
Noreen's description of the attack matches every detail of the victim's report. The rapist had come in the window. He had been hiding in wait. He had attacked her in her bedroom. Now, eerily, Noreen claims she has taken on the role of the victim and reveals something startling about the rapist.
He's apologizing to me. And I was so shocked. But it just was like a little scene from a movie, just that one quick little picture, and I could hear his words.
I'm sorry.
This bizarre detail that the rapist apologizes to his victims is already known to the investigators.
She was in a car accident.
He spoke to each victim, carried on very apologetic conversations.
And he apologized to some of the victims. It was very, very unusual.
But the psychic claims to have one more detail about the rapist.
I feel like his pants and shirt, they match. He's wearing a uniform. I could feel the material, and uniforms have a special heaviness to it. And I could tell that the pants and the shirt matched.
We were in disbelief. How does she know this? Because these things weren't out.
Noreen's first vision of the rapist suggests he's a laborer. But as she talks, she's also receiving other more cryptic psychic signals.
What I'm seeing, it seems to be going around and around.
The entire time, she would sit and talk, and she was drawing on the pad with a pencil, just drawing a perfect circle.
Noreen is sure the circles she's drawing mean something, but exactly what she can't say.
I remember first seeing him driving something. I remember knowing that whatever he drove went around and around.
She said, I have no idea what this means, but it has something to do with his occupation.
Without knowing anything, the psychic has accurately described the attacks and given the investigators a profile of the serial rapist.
There's obviously some powers at work there. It must be. And I've pretty much concluded that in my mind based upon this particular case.
Impressed with what they've learned so far, the detectives take Noreen to the home of the most recent victim.
They never told me any information, never gave me any feedback. Taking me to a second victim's house, I knew that I must be onto something.
There, she has a vision that would provide police with a vital clue. She claims to see where the rapist lives.
See this theater marquade, and I knew he lived real close. I remember feeling the brick.
Which was very interesting because there was an old theater right in the vicinity where all this was occurring. Most of these things occurred within a mile and a half, or just within 5 blocks.
Noreen has told the cops where she believes the rapist lives, but she also knows how he can be identified.
I wanted to go through his body to see if I could pick up any tattoos or scars. When I got to the knee, I could see the scar. First of all, it hurt. I remember the limping.
Pretty deep scar on his leg that would cause him a slight limp. Very new to us. We had no idea. She was getting a pretty detailed picture of this attack.
Can the psychic's cryptic clues help the police to track down a rapist who's already attacked 5 women?
And we had the information, but we didn't know what to do with it.
In the summer of 1979, a serial rapist is terrorizing the college town of Stanton, Virginia.
The police were scrambling to get an arrest in the case. There was a crisis of public confidence.
Desperate, the investigators have enlisted a psychic.
She said she was picking up energy, and she was taking on the role of this victim.
I feel theater. I knew we lived real close, and I remember feeling the brick.
She said he lived in an apartment right across from a movie theater. Brick apartment, she even stated. We did concentrate on the brick apartment building across from the movie theater.
We were in plane cars, and we had them positioned all around the city, and especially in that particular area.
The community became absolutely racked with fear. There was a tremendous need to get this case solved.
And it could have gone real bad for us.
Armed with details provided by Noreen's extraordinary psychic visions, police stake out the movie house and other key locations in Stanton and lie in wait.
We spent many sleepless nights on this case.
We would stake out till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, then come back out about 7.
Then, after 2 weeks of around-the-clock surveillance, on the evening of December 27th, a break.
Stanton Police Department.
A call came in that someone was peeking in the window.
The call comes from a woman living less than a block away from the movie house.
Ma'am, is the suspect still there? I understand, and I'll get an officer on the...
We had one of our cars sitting right near the end of that driveway.
Got a report of a person messing around the house, looking in the windows and this, that, and the other. And when he came out of the yard, it was a fenced yard he had to walk out of. When he came out of the yard, we stopped him and questioned him about his business in the area.
And something else.
He had a limp.
Could this limp be linked to the scar the psychic predicted the rapist would have on his knee?
Could you hold up for a minute?
Wasn't his home. We didn't know anyone in the home. Told us he was looking for some boxes because he was moving. He told us, start telling us a number of things that just didn't make any sense.
Got any weapons on you? Anything on you?
I think we all looked at him and said, I think we have the right guy here. I don't think there was any question.
Have the police got the right man? He does live by the theater.
From around here? Yeah. Watch your head.
The peeping Tom is taken into custody without a struggle. That man is 22-year-old James Bruce Robinson of Stanton. Police charge him with attempted burglary. But is he the man responsible for raping 5 women?
We knew we had him pretty well there for an attempted B&E, but at that point we had no idea that he was the rapist.
We did get his fingerprints, and I'd gotten a good palm print, so I took his palm prints, and we took those to the lab the next day.
Then they remember one of Noreen's most detailed predictions. The rapist would have a big scar on his knee.
It's very strange to ask him to pull his pant legs up. He had no idea why we asked him that. I was so excited when he pulled his pant leg up and showed me a great big scar there. So all of these things just started coming together.
The psychic is right. But to nail Robinson, they need more. They need hard evidence.
The evidence that we had was pretty, shall I say, skimpy on each one of these sexual assaults as far as linking anything particularly to him. We had one palm print off of one of the scenes.
The investigators devise a plan. To persuade Robinson to confess, they take him to the scene of his crimes.
It was a technique I used in many criminal investigations. Put him in a car and drive him to a neighborhood.
We did a lot of running around in the car with him, asking him things as we drove by people's houses that he had visited.
And he started out making confessions to trespasses and burglaries. That's how it started. You know.
Despite admitting to a string of burglaries, Robinson denies rape. But then, suddenly...
Sir, the lab just called back. Your palm print matches your suspect.
We got a call over the radio that the lab had called and matched that palm print. He knew exactly now that he's had it.
Confronted with the evidence, James Robinson breaks down and confesses to the rapes.
He gave the police details that only the true rapist could have known.
There's little doubt that Noreen helped police put the serial rapist behind bars. Her remarkable insights were right on almost every count. She described how the perpetrator had entered the homes, how he had apologized to his victims. She told police the suspect lived close to a theater, that he limped, and he had a scar on his knee.
This is Dixie movie theater. It's been here for years. And coincidentally, right across the street are the Woodward Apartments, and where the suspect was found to live.
And what about those puzzling circles Noreen drew?
The suspect drove cement mixer truck. He would leave the truck parked in front of the apartment or somewhere close, and he'd go in.
I must admit I was very impressed by that he drives something that goes round and round, and it turned out to be a cement mixer truck. That was pretty cool.
Noreen's vision of a man in uniform is also true.
The night we picked him up, he had the shirt on.
At the trial, the prosecution paint a chilling portrait of a man driven to rape and rape again. James Bruce Robinson pleads guilty and is sentenced to 5 concurrent 20-year sentences for the Stanton rapes.
We were very impressed with Noreen and the information that she was able to give us.
It gives you a little extra something to look for, you know, when you're out on the street.
Everything that she gave came about.
And then at the very end, when I left, as they were shaking my hands, they said, "When will we catch him?" And I thought for a second, and I said, "Before Christmas."
And we got him on December 22nd.
Called me later to thank me for my Christmas present.
Homestead, Pennsylvania, someone is raping elderly women in the dead of night.
That was a despicable crime.
Certainly a lot of fear.
Police have clues, but no suspects.
Somebody that we knew and that was just getting off, watching us.
Then a psychic has a vision of the attacks.
Horrible violence and screaming.
And the attacker.
This guy was like Spider-Man.
She also makes a chilling prediction.
We were going to have a murder rather than a vicious assault.
Can her mysterious visions help the police to catch a rapist before he becomes a killer? Homestead, Pennsylvania, a small neighborly town on the outskirts of Pittsburgh.
You knew the next door neighbors so well, they were like your own family.
A town built on steel.
Armor for tanks, armor for the ships. We were very much an important part of World War II in Homestead.
But in the mid-1980s, U.S. Steel is leaving Homestead, and with it, 15,000 jobs disappear.
It sort of was like a death blow to Homestead.
And something else is unraveling the fabric of this close-knit community. A rapist is attacking elderly women in their own homes in the dead of night.
It's like somebody raped my mother.
The first assault took place on August 10th, 1983. An 86-year-old woman living alone is attacked and raped in her bedroom. Detective Tom Hobart is the first officer on the scene.
Most people in the town knew each other. If you didn't know them, you knew family members. You knew someone associated with that family. That was a despicable crime. We'd take a lead and we would exhaust that lead. We worked that case for a number of years, and it seemed like at everything we were doing, we were running into dead ends.
No arrest is made and the case goes cold. But 2 years later, a 61-year-old woman is raped in her second-floor bedroom, a carbon copy of the first assault.
I was born and raised in this town. The first 2 victims I knew personally. These are our folks. These are our people. We knew them. We knew their sons, their daughters.
People tend to forget. They didn't immediately associate the two crimes. We, however, associated immediately just because of the MO, if you will.
Though police know the rapes are connected, they have no suspect.
The victim never saw anything. The victim would awake with him placing something over their face, whether it was a pillow, a blanket, whatever he could. But he always covered their face.
We knew fingerprints matched, but we couldn't match them to anybody at the time. We had serology matches and pubic hair samples.
Forensics evidence told us that he was a black male. We knew he was a rather large man. The victims, when they would describe, they'd actually use their hands and say, you know, I grabbed him and his arms were big.
You take a small area that is saturated with dogs and none of the dogs barked. We knew that this individual responsible lived in the immediate neighborhood.
He was probably a younger man because his method of entering these homes, he had to be strong, he had to be agile. Forensically, we had the evidence from the very beginning. We just didn't have a suspect.
But you got to imagine, other crimes go on. We're a small town, a small department, so we had to pool resources as we need them. We couldn't let the rest of the town suffer because of these incidents.
The rapist leaves clues, but the police still have no suspects, and there is no arrest. Then, 18 months later, a third attack. A 75-year-old widow raped in her second-floor bedroom.
Evidence was pointing to one person that they realized they had a serial rapist on their hands.
The interviewing the women broke your heart. It was very, very embarrassing for them to sit down and talk to me. I was a young man. It just became very personal.
Saving this community was our mission.
The frustration had set in from not being able to find the assailant.
I don't think Hobart went home for a week. I mean, when he did go home, I had to order him home.
With the culprit still at large, Detective Hobart does something unusual. His brother met a psychic at a party and suggests she might be able to help.
He's very skeptical of psychics, and he had went to a party in the Greensburg area, where Nancy's from, and he had met her at the party, and that she was a psychic, and she did a couple neat things that he thought were pretty neat. We chased all our forensic leads down. We hit dead ends with those. When you ask a policeman how to do something, you get a police response. Policemen think the same way. We may as well get someone in from the outside who can give us a new perspective. Whether it was good information or bad information, it was going to be new information. And when he gave me this idea, I thought, why not?
You know, I kind of fluffed it off at first, and then I realized, you know, he's serious. And I said, hey, let's go for it. See what can happen. It certainly couldn't hurt.
Nancy Meyer is a psychic who specializes in what she calls ranging.
What I usually use when I'm working on cases, the environment itself. The whole environment absorbs what happened. It runs as a movie, but I'm in it, and I can pull the information out.
I contact Nancy, and I asked Nancy if she could meet with me, maybe provide me with whatever she could do to help.
Give me a time and I'll be there, because these women who were being assaulted were the age of my own mother.
I had hoped that Nancy would come in and say, here we go, this is the guy you're looking for, let's go knock on his door, and I'd open the door and I'd arrest him and the case would be over. That's not what happened.
But before the psychic gets a chance to meet the detective, there is another rape, just 2 weeks after the third. A 64-year-old woman is viciously assaulted in her second-floor bedroom. But police still have no one in their sights. When they finally meet, Detective Hobart tells the psychic nothing about the case.
I wanted her to be able to come in and tell me something, not me tell her. She did request that her and I walk the general area because she said that she would get a better read, a better vibrations on what she was looking for. I walked several steps behind Nancy and let Nancy lead the way.
As they walk through the 2-block area where all 4 of the rapes occurred, Nancy Meyer appears to tune in on the crimes.
Several times, she stopped right in front of one of the homes and would say, I'm getting some bad feelings from this house.
The assaults were so bad, it came right through the walls of the house.
Okay.
Somehow, Nancy Meyer is able to pinpoint information that only the police knew. Remarkably, she is able to tell the detective in which homes the attacks occurred.
Picking the homes where the assaults took place. It was uncanny. She was saying things that no one told her. but I knew to be fact already.
And now Nancy claims she can see the actual attacks.
In the images, I saw that he was African American. It was his neighborhood. He knew the streets. He knew how to get from one house to the other. He even recognized the people. And then I'd be looking up at the side of the house, realizing this guy was like Spider-Man. He climbed drain pipes. He went up the sides of houses. He was going in second-story windows. He clearly enjoyed the risk.
As to how that entry was made, were very, very accurate, as if she almost knew what had taken place.
He would come in the window, and he would stand for a while looking at his victim sleeping. And it was very clear by the time I got to the fourth property that I was picking up the exact same thought patterns on every single one of those properties. There was no deviation.
But what she tells the detective next is something he didn't know.
It was a street light, and as he turned to look to the street, I got a good visual of his face.
So I asked her, I said, if you could draw him? And she said, yeah.
And I said, holy hell, we got the break we've been hunting for.
But is it enough to stop a serial rapist before he strikes again? In Homestead, Pennsylvania, a faceless rapist is targeting elderly women in their homes. Stymied, the police call in a psychic for help.
Whether it was good information or bad information, it was going to be new information.
Who claims to see the attacker's face.
And as he turned, I got a good visual of his face.
Something no one up to now had been able to do.
We got the break we've been hunting for.
Because Nancy's psychic description of the rapist is so specific, Detective Hobart brings in a police sketch artist.
He's got a broad face, the eyes.
Mainly we use composites and sketch artists to eliminate people more so than who it is, it's who it isn't. Most people have seen the overlays that are... We actually had a sketch artist that did the drawings. He changed whatever Nancy was feeling that wasn't right. He changed.
He has this leather hat. Every time I visualize him, he has this hat on.
Normal practice is to remove anything like a hat from the sketch so as to focus on the suspect's features, but producing a police sketch based on the word of a psychic is anything but normal.
I'm off to the side. I have nothing to do with Nancy explaining the sketch artist. I'm just accompanying her. And it's a long day. The hat's not right. You have to move the hat this way. You have to move. I was becoming frustrated, and the sketch artist was becoming frustrated. It's a hat. It's a hat. You know, but no, a hat had to be a certain way.
But we got in an argument over the hat. You don't put a hat on a sketch. This is against protocol. You don't do it. And I said, yes, but if people are to recognize him, the hat has to be on him because he's never without it.
As far as a clue that we were going to go out and everybody had a hat on, and that wasn't the situation. A lot of people wear hats. Nancy explained a black leather cap, and she had it over and over. I felt sorry for the sketch artist, how many times she made him change the hat.
And we told our officers, look, this is not an official wanted poster. This is not something that a victim of a crime has produced. This came from Nancy, a psychic.
And as most people have seen sketch artists, they're never going to be a photograph. But we were still looking at this saying, hey, it's better than what we had.
A very broad nose at the bottom.
But before the psychic sketch is even circulated, the rapist strikes yet again. April 24th, 1987, just 5 weeks after the last attack, a 76-year-old widow is assaulted in her home.
Each one escalated that he became much more aggressive.
The entire town is on edge.
Not panic, but it was certainly a lot of fear.
We had now formed an actual task force where we were on the streets every day.
There were a lot of tired policemen from Allegheny County and the sheriff's departments.
With the attacks intensifying, police ask the psychic for help again, but this time she takes a different approach.
And I said, I think we need to get ahead of this guy and start using my abilities to figure out where he's going to target next. And as we crossed over one street, I could pick up this man walking around late at night checking out when people's lights were going off, and I noticed that he was on this street quite a bit. And I said to Tommy, this has to be near where he's living, because I keep sensing him.
And what the psychic says next is the last thing that police wanted to hear.
Nancy said, we have to get this guy. We're going to have to get him soon because
we were going to have a murder rather than a vicious assault.
And with the psychic's next revelation, the investigation takes an astonishing turn.
And I felt him checking a house out particularly closely.
And she said, this is not one of your victims, but I'm getting some bad energy coming from this house. Do you know who lives here? There was no indication of the house that who lived there. There was no special signs on the door or anything like that. It looked like any other house in the neighborhood. So when she picked that out, it raised the hair on my neck, because there was no reason for Nancy to be able to pick that particular house out, and not knowing anything about the resident of the house. However, I knew that that was a relative of the chief's.
For Police Chief Kelly, the case has just become up close and personal. He takes the psychic's warning seriously and stakes out his grandmother's house.
I got my German Shepherd. Tell him to come on. Bring it on. When you're sitting there in the silence waiting for something brutal to come in, you knew that probably it was going to be a life or death situation. You're aware of every single sound in the night. You can hear your heart pound. The adrenaline takes over. And you're crushed when any of these ladies are victimized the way they were. And it's personal.
But the chief's grandmother isn't the next to fall prey to the rapist. 2 weeks after Nancy's chilling prediction, on a hot June night, an 86-year-old woman living just yards from the chief's grandmother becomes victim number 6.
I was devastated. It was at a lady's house who shared the same alley and the same ethnic last name. In fact, they were related.
It was like, ha, I know you're here. I can still do it.
Despite working night and day, police appear no closer to capturing this elusive predator.
Many times, I would get up out of bed, come to Homestead, hide in an alley, sit in a car, sit on the side of the road, hoping that I would see something.
The police were passing out boat horns for the women, 200 of them, in fact, so that they could blow a horn and at least have the police come, because they were loud horns. They were advising people to buy dogs.
We were doing everything humanly possible.
The residents were living in a lockdown fear. It wasn't a community that has whole house air conditioning. It was hot. It was summertime. It was blazing hot. They couldn't open a window and put a fan in the window for fear that someone would crawl through that window.
They lived in jail while the perpetrator was probably walking around watching us. And we had to catch this guy.
I was riding up the hill and I saw this elderly lady that I knew carrying some grocery bags up the hill. And I stopped and I says, come on, get in, I'll ride you home. It's just too hot. And you shouldn't be walking in this hot day, you know. It gave her a little bit of hell. And when I dropped her off at her house, I personally had said to her, check your windows and just be careful. And she says, okay, you know. I just walked into the station and Chief Kelly said, we had another rape yesterday. And I said, oh man, like, who was it? And he mentioned the name, and it was the lady that I had taken up the hill.
Despite the mayor's warning, on August 25th, the 76-year-old lady became the 7th victim. It was 2 months after the 6th attack, but this time the violence has escalated to a dangerous level. Fear has gripped Homestead, Pennsylvania. A serial rapist is preying on elderly women, and police seem powerless to stop him.
These are our people. We knew them.
Chased all our forensic leads down. We hit dead ends with those. The frustration set in.
Psychic Nancy Meyer is helping with the investigation. She's certain, if not caught soon, the rapist will turn killer.
We were going to have a murder rather than a vicious assault.
At the scene of the last rape, they had found a large knife on the steps of her home, that he had threatened to cut her throat if she didn't stop fighting.
We were convinced 100% that we were dealing with somebody that we knew and that was just getting off, watching us.
But it was, again, looking for that proverbial needle in a haystack. He wasn't going to appear to be public enemy number one. He was going to appear to be a nice young man.
With the investigation hitting a wall, Detective Hobart again contacts the psychic.
After the last victim, Nancy and I spoke again. I was eating, sleeping, and drinking this case, along with other officers. I wasn't the only officer doing that. I'm sure that my frustrations of being unable to locate this guy were starting to show.
And I said, Tommy, you're going to have him by next week. It's going to be over with. You're going to arrest him. You won't need me anymore. I'll believe that when I see it. But he said, gee, I hope you're right. I said, I hope I'm right. I hope this nightmare's over with.
And then, the break the entire town has been waiting for.
None of our victims had anything ever taken from them until our last victim.
One of those items was a shotgun.
Phone rang, 3 o'clock in the morning. It was a guy I know, and he said, I know who you're hunting for. I said, come on. They took a shotgun last night, didn't they? We never publicized that. Never. And he said, it's over Steel City Arms over in Braddock. The guy's trying to sell it. I can set it up for you.
The informant sets up the buy, and the police, armed with the psychic's sketch, stake out the pawn shop and wait. When the suspect arrives and takes back possession of the gun, the police are there to arrest him.
And I had the sketch sitting next to me on the seat, and he turned and kind of looked at me. I said, this was like a photograph of this guy. And of course, at the time, my belief in the psychics went sky high.
When he did return and when he did take back custody of the shotgun, they were there to arrest him on a charge of receiving stolen property. And to this point, they didn't have his fingerprints.
We brought him into the police department, Mirandized him, his rights, rolled his fingerprints. We had a district attorney there advising us to make sure that every move we made was calculated, that there's not going to be any mistakes. This man is going to go to trial. There's not going to be any motions to suppress. There's not going to be any technicalities to walk on.
We called a fingerprint expert. When he compared the prints, he just looked up and said, gentlemen, it's over.
You would have thought everybody in the room would have been high-fiving or yelling or screaming. Wasn't a sound in the room.
Matched the fingerprints, and all the forensic evidence on down the line matched.
After 4 years and 7 vicious attacks, the man arrested is 22-year-old Dennis Foy. Unemployed, Foy lived with his parents on the same block where one of the rapes occurred.
Foy's arrest in the fall of 1987 came after his case received not only local but national publicity.
I think my feeling is for the victims, and they're through it, so am I.
Thank God that these women that were raped were heroes enough to go to court.
You saw 3 widows and a woman who had never married, who had told police she in fact had been a virgin, a 76-year-old woman, had to testify in detail.
A year later at his trial, Foy faced the women he violated. In court, the jury hear the intimate details of Foy's trail of terror. He knew his victims and staked out their homes, waiting for his chance. He broke in by scaling the side of a house and entering through a second-floor window. Inside, he attacked the defenseless women and stifled their cries for help with a pillow or whatever else was nearby. Sometimes he tied their feet and hands. He threatened his final victim with a knife. The judge described his acts as unspeakable. Foy is convicted on all counts and receives 100 years in maximum security prison. With no inside knowledge, how could psychic Nancy Meyer have known so much about this case? She knew the attacker was African American, lived in the neighborhood, and knew his victims. Through her psychic ranging, she described how he entered each home through the second-story window, and she correctly predicted when the investigation would be over. And what about that hat? When Dennis Foy was arrested, He wore a hat eerily similar to the one Nancy had the sketch artist draw.
If you're gonna put a hat on somebody, you put a hat on, whatever. But she wanted it tilted a certain way. She wanted it to be, to cover a certain part, you know, the head. The things that amazed me is she hit so many things right. And the last thing was the hat. She just hit, the hat was just, it was there. It was the way she described it and painstakingly described it.
Today, Homestead, Pennsylvania is bouncing back from economic downturn.
We haven't bounced back to where we should be, but we had a developer that bought the U.S. Steel property. Right now it's called the Waterfront.
But no one can forget those 5 years when one man held an entire community hostage.
You know, these acts affect a lot of people. Thank goodness they caught him. Who knows what the next step might have been.
You'll never lose that feeling, you know. You'll never lose the feeling that you could have done more for these people.
Just to do it for fun, I don't think so. It's not fun ranging assaults like that. There's nothing fun about it. But when it gets results, then it's worth it.
She said we would have them, and it wasn't shortly thereafter that we did. So, you explain it.
An elderly widow is brutally murdered in her home.
This was an absolute senseless crime.
Police have little evidence and no one's talking.
There were so many people who were afraid that the killers were still in the community.
But a psychic has disturbing visions of the crime.
She had been stabbed so many times.
Can a psychic's insights solve the mystery of who killed Rose Swartwood? Elmyra, New York, an historic town of clapboard houses and white picket fences. A town Huckleberry Finn author Mark Twain once called home. A town unaccustomed to crime. But not on August 25th, 1988. On that day, 74-year-old Rose Swartwood, widowed and living alone, is found dead in her apartment. She'd been the victim of a shocking attack. Beaten, bitten, and stabbed to death.
I think the nature of the crime, being an elderly woman that lived alone, was very upsetting.
It caught a lot of the media attention and upset a lot of the people in the community.
I mean, it was a terrible, heinous crime.
Mike Moosey from the local sheriff's office and Corky Patterson from the Elmyra Police Department are assigned to investigate this gruesome case.
Yeah, there hadn't been a murder in Elmyra in several years.
Jim Pfeiffer is a journalist who covered the story.
What bothered people the most, I thought, was this is a woman who's innocent, who has no enemies. It could happen to me. You know, it isn't supposed to happen to anyone, but especially to people like this.
It was believed from the very beginning of this investigation that it was possibly a burglary gone to a homicide rather than a planned homicide. I think we felt quite strongly that this was not anticipated to be a homicide from the beginning, but more a burglary gone bad.
Moosey and Patterson face major problems. Despite the apparent frenzy of the murder, little forensic evidence was left behind by Rose's killers.
The crime scene was very cleaned up. There were some things disturbed still when the police arrived there, but it appeared they had scrubbed down the walls and the floors with some type of cleaning agent.
Not only this, but locals are reluctant to talk.
A lot of times people just would clam up and they give them false information. So it would make it more difficult for the police, who in this community were used to quickly solving a crime.
Rose lived in one of Elmyra's tougher neighborhoods, the Hawthorne Court housing project.
I believe there were people that felt they would be threatened if they cooperated with the police.
Scores of potential suspects are interviewed and eliminated. Only 2 rise to the top of the list. William Cuddy and Demetrius Moore, both local, both well known to police.
We were relatively certain who these suspects were and what their involvement in the crime was.
With little evidence to tie Cuddy and Moore to the crime scene and no witnesses prepared to come forward, the investigation gradually stalls.
There were so many people who were afraid that the killers were still in the community. Police being blamed for not doing a good job, when that wasn't the case. They were doing a good job. They just couldn't get a lot of cooperation, a lot of information.
Months pass with no new leads. The case grows cold. But Detectives Moosey and Patterson don't give up. They're not about to let Rose Swartwood's killers away with murder. 2 years after her homicide, with nothing to lose, Detective Moosey decides to try something very different. He decides to enlist a psychic.
I had heard about Phil Jordan from other law enforcement agencies. I had never been to him before.
Phil Jordan is one of America's best-known psychics with a strong track record of helping cops solve difficult crimes.
I have been working with the police for the past 35 years.
Jordan uses photographs to make a psychic connection to crime scenes.
When I work on a case, I will take a picture of the victim. And as I look at that picture, I start seeing things about that person.
Detectives decide to tell Jordan nothing about Rose Swartwood or her murder.
When Corky and Mike came to the first meeting, they brought a picture of Rose Swartwood with them. And I looked at that picture and did a reading.
Right away, Jordan surprises the police.
The perpetrators, I felt, came into the dwelling believing they were going to do a burglary, and they were surprised to find that there was a person in the house. And then I feel as though both the perpetrators felt as though the whole situation went completely wrong, that they had gotten much more involved than they wanted to in the crime itself.
Jordan claims his visions reveal not only what happened during the crime, but also what the killers did after.
Then I felt as though they would try to put things back the way they had found it.
Again, the cops are surprised. Jordan has just identified the reason their investigation has so little physical evidence. But the big question is, can he tell them who killed Rose Swartwood? To find out, they hand him a stack of photos.
I took probably between 50 and 75 mugshots of various people to see if any of them had any significance to him whatsoever.
We had pictures of people who had been suspects but ruled out, and we had pictures of people who we didn't think had any involvement whatsoever. No names on any of the photographs or anything.
Just quietly, we sat there for approximately 10 or 15 minutes as he flipped through several mugshots. And I noticed, as did Sergeant Patterson, he pulled out a picture of Bill Cuddy and set it aside. He then continued to flip through the photographs, and probably 20 or 30 photographs later, he pulled a mugshot of Demetrius Moore, and he laid that down.
I felt one of the perpetrators would be black and one of them would be white.
It was a moment that would change the course of a 2-year investigation.
When he pulled those 2 pictures out and set them aside, I was trying my best not to look at Sergeant Patterson, but he had pulled out our 2 prime suspects.
With no prior knowledge, how could the psychic have zeroed in on the 2 prime suspects?
Just about everything that he described was pretty much on the money.
But can a psychic's dark visions help police find justice for Rose Swartwood? For 2 years, Elmyra, New York area detectives Mike Moosey and Corky Patterson have been hunting the vicious killer of an elderly widow.
Very unusual for us to have a crime like that. It was extremely rare here.
With little evidence and no witnesses, the police investigation had hit a wall, until a psychic identifies the two prime suspects who, up to now, detectives haven't had the evidence to arrest.
When he completed going through all the photographs, he put the rest of them down and said that he felt that the two that he had pulled out, that being the photographs of Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy, were in fact the two people that he felt were directly involved in the crime of the death of Rose Swartwood.
William Cuddy is a name very familiar to Elmyra police.
Cuddy was doing time. He pled guilty in June of '89 to the sexual abuse charge that I had originally investigated him on.
William Cuddy was a suspect because a jailhouse informant had contacted Detective Moosey saying Cuddy had been bragging in jail about killing Rose. But when the detective tried to question Cuddy, the prisoner wouldn't talk.
He had an incredible loss of memory. He did not wish to remember any of the details and immediately posed a problem for us.
Demetrius Moore is another story.
Demetrius Moore was actually a neighbor of the victim and was questioned along with several other people as a potential suspect.
Moore has remained a suspect because he had a motive. He blamed Rose and her complaints about his loud music for his eviction from Hawthorne Court.
In fact, a few weeks prior to her death, some obscenities were written on her back door. It was alleged that Demetrius was the one that was responsible for putting those obscenities on the back door.
People in the neighborhood are afraid of Demetrius Moore. Rumors on the street say he is linked to the criminal underworld. His reputation has been a major stumbling block to the investigation.
Demetrius was free and on the street, and which was another thing that hampered some people wanting to cooperate with us.
By pulling the two mugshots, Phil Jordan has confirmed the suspicions of the detectives. Now the psychic has a vision of the actual crime.
Whenever I work a case, I not only try to discover how the person may have died, but I also try to figure out what the injuries were inflicted with. In this case, I felt as though she was stabbed, and I could feel that there'd be a rather long knife that was used.
If one was to read the autopsy report, they'd understand that Mr. Jordan's descriptions were quite correct.
The psychic also claims he can see which of the two suspects actually stabbed Rose.
Phil described to us that the person who did the actual slaying, the actual killing itself, would have a tattoo on their shoulder.
I noticed a marking on his arm that would be a tattoo, and I felt that it had a woman's name in it, but I couldn't make out the woman's name.
I knew that Cuddy had such a tattoo on his left shoulder. Mike was not aware of it. No one else connected with the case was aware of it.
And that he was the perpetrator, the assailant that killed Rose Swartwood.
The tattoo is a stunning revelation, one that Jordan had no way of knowing.
Yeah, he was able to describe Mr. Cuddy as being a vicious person, a person who hated women, had a deep hatred for women.
After 2 frustrating years, Detectives Moosey and Patterson's visit to Phil Jordan re-energizes the case. More than ever, they believe Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy are responsible for the death of Rose Swartwood.
We left there with some pretty surprising feelings that he had told us things about Cuddy that probably not a lot of people had known or even investigated.
But now the police must prove that Cuddy and Moore are the killers, and it's not going to be easy.
So we continued to build the case, and we weren't going to jump before we had all the evidence we could collect and all the information that we needed.
A major difficulty has been placing Cuddy and Moore at the crime scene. The detectives revisit the forensic evidence.
There was a sample of blood that was found at the point of entry, which is a rear door, a small broken window.
The drop of blood doesn't match the DNA of either Rose Swartwood or William Cuddy, but trying to match it to Demetrius Moore has stymied the police.
You would have to apply for a court order. And in this case, in order to get a court order, you would at least need enough evidence to substantiate that this person was a viable suspect. Initially, we didn't feel we had enough evidence to do that.
The other piece of forensic evidence comes from the victim's body, bite marks. In the struggle before she died, Rose Swartwood was bitten on the shoulder.
Bite marks are very difficult to identify most of the time, especially when the victim is the receiver of the bite mark.
Though the psychic and the cops both believe William Cuddy stabbed Rose, the investigators don't believe he bit her, and for good reason.
Mr. Cuddy wore dentures, and it was clear that the person who did the biting didn't wear dentures.
If Moore and Cuddy were accomplices in the murder, Moore must be the one who did the biting.
There was actually a photograph taken of Demetrius Moore's teeth on the day of the homicide. When he was being interviewed, the detectives thought enough and were smart enough to take a voluntary picture of his teeth.
Demetrius Moore's teeth may be the key to solving the murder mystery, but he's about to do something no one could ever imagine. For 2 years, detectives Mike Moosey and Corky Patterson have been investigating the murder of elderly widow Rose Swartwood.
This was an absolute senseless crime from the very beginning.
Psychic Phil Jordan has identified the 2 prime suspects, Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy.
At the time of the incident, I believe that I felt one of the perpetrators would be black and one of them would be white.
Detectives have only 2 significant pieces of evidence: a single drop of blood and bite marks found on the victim. Police believe the bite marks belong to Demetrius Moore, but before they can prove it, Moore does something very strange.
The unique thing there was it was found that Demetrius had filed his teeth.
Using a chisel, incredibly, Moore files down his own teeth. What's worse for detectives, they're still unable to obtain a warrant to test Moore's DNA or indeed make a mold of his now damaged teeth. Frustrated, the detectives return to Phil Jordan. What they really want to know is what connects their 2 prime suspects.
There was no information, or anyone had never come forward to put those 2 together at any given time.
Again, the psychic, who has been told nothing about the case, amazes the detectives. He confirms their belief that Cuddy and Moore were together at a party the night Rose was killed.
I felt as I observed the party, it would be a party I would not want to go to because I know I would feel uncomfortable by the character of people that were there. I could see that it was people having a good time, but yet more for the sake of partying to probably drink and get high.
The party is crucial to the investigation. It's the potential link that puts Cuddy and Moore together the night of the murder.
When we learned about the party initially occurring the night of the homicide, it was very difficult for us to get people at the party to remember who came, who left, who was there, who came with who. So locating people that were at the party for additional information on these 2 or anyone else that might have been with them was very difficult for a period of time.
I remember very distinctly seeing the house where I felt that the party had taken place, that there would have to be an enclosed stairwell going up the outside of the house.
He felt that the house was, I believe he said, green in color and had a very distinct outside staircase which led to a 2nd floor, which Sergeant Patterson and I knew to be the location of the party house.
I felt as though they would be first at the party, they would leave the party, commit this heinous act, and then go back to the party, which showed me they probably had little conscience.
Is Jordan's paranormal vision correct? Detectives in Elmyra, New York are closer than ever to solving the murder of Rose Swartwood. Armed with a psychic's visions of the crime, they confront reluctant witnesses.
We did have people that came forward, finally, and did remember Cuddy coming with Demetrius Moore. Yes, that link was finally made.
Those witnesses now paint a startling portrait of Moore and Cuddy's behavior the night of the murder.
Demetrius and Cuddy left the party, supposed to go get some beer and money for beer and drugs or whatever. And that when they returned, Cuddy had a lot of blood on him. Demetrius had a small amount on him, and there was some argument out on the porch, and I believe Demetrius was saying something like, you didn't have to kill her like that.
Once again, Phil Jordan was right. Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy were together the night Rose Swartwood was killed. Finally, police have the link that puts their suspects together the night of the crime. They can now get the court order to compare Moore's DNA with that single drop of blood found at the crime scene.
We certainly felt confident that there would be a match, or at least a grouping that was consistent with, which would be sound evidence against him being at the scene of the crime, which he had denied, for years at this point.
Demetrius Moore's DNA matches the blood found on Rose Swartwood's broken window. Moore and Cuddy are charged with the second-degree murder of Rose Swartwood. At the trial, Moore challenges one of the key pieces of evidence against him, that he filed down his teeth.
The most unusual thing I ever saw on a witness stand. His excuse was, when he took the stand, his teeth were chipped up like that because he opened beer bottles with his teeth. And he opened up 2 beer bottles on the stand. His lawyer wanted to show the jury on the stand.
What it didn't do is alter the pattern of his teeth. It certainly altered the ridges of the teeth.
So they couldn't match the bite marks exactly. It didn't do him any good to file his teeth.
Evidence at the trial showed Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy met at the party house. When they ran out of drugs and alcohol, Moore suggested they rob Rose.
Unfortunately, she had returned home that evening and was found in the apartment. She had apparently been getting ready for bed or just going to bed when the entry was made.
The robbers surprised Rose. There was a struggle. Moore bit the elderly, defenseless victim on the shoulder. Then William Cuddy began to stab her, and he stabbed her over 40 times. After killing Rose Swartwood, Cuddy and Moore dragged her body to her bed, and before leaving, they methodically washed the blood from the floor and the walls, missing just a single drop. Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy are both found guilty, and both men are sentenced to 25 years.
I can't speak for the jury, so I don't know if it had an impact on the jury or on the trial. It had an impact on me that someone could not only brutally murder a 72 or 74-year-old woman this way, but then stay around and clean it up afterwards. They have to have no remorse, no conscience.
Today, the detectives are still amazed at the accuracy of Phil Jordan's visions. The psychic pulled William Cuddy and Demetrius Moore's photo from a stack of mugshots and identified Cuddy as the killer by a tattoo on his shoulder. Phil described the attack as a robbery gone bad and the party house where Cuddy and Moore hatched their plan.
A good psychic can provide you with leads or something, or an avenue to go on when you don't have any.
He's done some pretty amazing things.
They wanted to resolve the case for the family and for Rose, but they also wanted the community to be safe.
In Malvern, Arkansas, the son of a local police investigator is abducted at Knifepoint.
I thought that somebody that I had either arrested or busted was getting back at me in some way.
But a massive manhunt fails to find him.
The first 24 hours are crucial because the longer it goes, the consequences are always worse.
His parents, desperate to save their son, ask a psychic for help.
She would keep assuring me that he was alive.
Can the psychic help to find Tyson before it's too late?
He was going to kill Tyson.
Malvern, Arkansas, a town of 9,000, is home to the world's largest brick factory. It's also home to 17-year-old Tyson Eford. A typical teenager in his last year of high school, he's passionate about basketball and his pickup truck. To pay for his first set of wheels, he also works part-time on the night shift at the local food center. His shift on November 14th, 1991 begins like any other, until a man approaches Tyson and says that his beloved pickup has been hit in the parking lot. Telling the manager he'll be right back, Tyson follows the man out to investigate. He never returns. 30 minutes later, when the manager sees that Tyson's truck is still parked in the lot, he calls the police, and the police call Tyson's parents, Anita, a probation officer, and Henry Eford, a county sheriff.
We get to the parking lot, and his truck and his school books and stuff are still there. I knew something had happened, because he thought more of that truck than he did anything in the world, you know.
The next morning, Malvern wakes up to one of the largest manhunts in Arkansas history.
All law enforcement in Hot Spring County, Malvern, the city, the county, the state, everybody was out looking for him.
Chuck Hefner is the lead investigator for the Arkansas State Police.
When you have a father, no matter where he works, involved, you have to keep some distance. We did not cut him out because it's his family. He wants to be involved, and he's a police officer.
But the investigation has few leads, except for the night manager's sketchy description of the man he saw with Tyson, and another witness who saw a scuffle in the parking lot. The Eford's only son has simply vanished.
They were hunting, they were looking, and I couldn't get no feedback. No feedback. None. It's just like somebody had come in and taken him off the earth.
2 days pass, and police fail to uncover a single new clue. His abduction is a complete mystery.
I think even the police even thought that there would be a ransom call in, but there wasn't.
I didn't feel like it would ever be a ransom. I felt like that it was revenge against me. In fact, deep down, I just knew that I would find him dead.
You'll always look for a child that's alive. That's what you're looking for. You hope you don't find the other, but that's not what you're looking for until there is some evidence to point you in that direction. And we didn't have anything to point us in that direction, so we were still looking for Tyson to be alive somewhere.
Just bring my son home or tell me where I can go get him anywhere, anything that you want.
But with no evidence, the odds of finding Tyson alive are fading by the hour.
At that point, the parent was more than police officer. I would have done anything, you know, to get my son back.
I love him. He is our only son.
Then, out of desperation, Anita Eford's brother makes a suggestion.
We love him. And I said, who's Carol Payton? He said, she's a psychic in Little Rock. He said, I've used her a couple of times. And I said, yes. I said, you do whatever you need to do. Get her down here.
And I said, yes, of course, I'll help. But I need some things from him in order to touch into him, to find out what's happened to him.
Carol Pate learned as a young girl she had a psychic gift for finding missing people. Since then, she's been involved in hundreds of investigations.
I use psychometry. That is touching a photograph of an individual or of a place, or handwriting and ink, touching that. And it's like tuning in a radio station. I see what they see. I feel what they feel. I think what they're thinking primarily.
3 days after Tyson's disappearance, Carol Pate drives from Little Rock to Malvern to meet the Efords.
She wanted something of his that was personal, that no one else had worn or touched or really anything. And I said, well, I've got a shoe. And she said, yes, I can focus in on him. Do you have a recent picture of him?
So they brought me a photograph, and they brought me his shoe, and I sat down at the table, and I quietly touched into both. And the first thing that I got was he was alive. Tyson's alive. That was wonderful.
But Carol also tells Anita she is visualizing the whole abduction, just as Tyson had experienced it.
I saw the whole thing immediately. I saw the men, I saw the man in camouflage, I saw the truck. It happened very quickly.
Now Carol asks Anita to take her to the crime scene.
I got in touch with Henry, and I told him that I had Carol with me, and we met him at the parking lot.
Henry Eford's conscience is torn. As a cop, he deals in hard evidence. As a father, he's willing to try anything.
I get Tyson coming out of the front of the store at the parking lot. I got a better visual of the abductors. I got a better visual of the way they went out and how they grabbed him and how they forced him into the truck. There's a man that grabs him, the man that told him that the truck had been hit. He throws him inside the truck.
I call myself a halfway decent investigator. I'm getting information that nobody else had ever got. We didn't even know which direction he had went in, other than he went out the back of the parking lot.
They drive. They went that way, right out through the back, and to the left.
Will the psychic's visions turn out to be true and help Tyson's family find him before it's too late? In Malvern, Arkansas, a massive search has failed to find 17-year-old kidnap victim Tyson Eford. After 2 frustrating days of no leads, his parents ask psychic Carol Pate to help them find their son. At the crime scene, the parking lot of a local grocery store, Carol has a vision that Tyson is still alive. She claims she can even see where his abductors have taken him.
They went that way, and they turned left.
She said something to me about, I'll see a ridge. And I thought maybe she was talking about a mountain or a ridge or hill or something. And she said, no, it's a road. And I said, there's a ridge road.
Yes, that's it, Ridge Road. They took him down Ridge Road. They don't live far from Ridge Road. They took him to a house.
Tyson's father, a county sheriff, asks Carol to lead him to the location where she believes his son is being held.
And it was like I was following a trail of energy. And I started getting the details on the house. The house was small, white. It didn't look like a house. It looked different.
And she carried me straight down. We hit the end of the blacktop and went into the gravel.
The energy stopped. And I couldn't tell which way to go.
And she told me, she said, I've lost it.
But it was like there was a wall there, and I couldn't go any farther. And we weren't supposed to go any farther.
Despite Carol's frustrating psychic dead end, Henry and Anita are convinced she holds the key to finding their boy.
This was the first information that we had gotten.
Nobody was coming up with anything. And then me talking with Carol, I was feeding that information to them.
So anything that he would give us, we would look into, because he knew the area well.
One promising lead is Carol's description of where Tyson is being held, a simple white house or a hunting trailer, popular in this rural area.
He had told us that she could see him in a building like a deer camp. That focused all of the investigation on buildings and deer camps and stuff. We searched deer camps in Clark County, Hot Spring County, Dallas County. In other words, what she was telling me, the whole investigation was in a roundabout way of swinging to what she had said because we had no other leads.
But even though Henry is a respected local cop, not everyone involved in the investigation is happy that the Effords have asked a psychic for help.
None of the police would work with me any way, shape, or form. I had to work directly with the Effords. That was the only way.
And we had some of the officers, one officer, elected officer, that said it was the work of the devil. Well, that's his belief. But I'm an investigator. I take anything that I can get a hold of to try to get to the bottom of the case.
The Effords and Carol Pate agree to keep in constant contact. Carol will try to connect psychically with Tyson every day and report what she sees or senses.
I checked on Tyson every single day. I was in contact with the parents every single day. I would give them information that I was seeing, and I knew he wasn't far from where I lost the energy trail.
I wanted to believe that he was still alive and that we would find him. She would keep assuring me that he was alive.
The psychic is sure Tyson is not dead, although some of her visions are deeply disturbing.
He was very frightened. I knew that he was being abused.
She talked about Russian roulette, where they hold a gun to your head and pull the trigger, and that they were doing that to Tyson, but she said he's still alive.
I felt the gun against my head, or Tyson's head. It was a bizarre feeling.
According to Carol's dark, disturbing visions, there are two men who abducted Tyson. One wears cowboy boots and a unique belt buckle, but he disappears from her psychic view. The other man is always there, always has a gun in his hand, and never takes his eyes off Tyson. But there are some visions that Carol does not dare tell the parents.
The man raped Tyson on several occasions. There was a lot of brutality. There was a lot of...
5 days have passed since Tyson disappeared without a trace. Apart from the psychic's visions, there are still no new clues.
I was just wore completely out. I was done to the point that I couldn't think straight. I was to the point that I had to have closure somewhere because I figured Tyson was dead.
He kept saying, you know, you got to, be prepared for this. You got to be prepared. And I said, I'm not going to be prepared for it. He's still alive. And I said, we got to find him.
And then, suddenly, the psychic's visions turned even darker.
There was a total shift. And I knew that Tyson had maybe 24 hours, that this man was going to do something.
I remember her calling and saying that, we've got to find him because...
She said something about a grave.
In Carol's vision, Tyson is dragged from the house, taken to a field, shown 3 graves, and forced to kneel down in one of them. Then the man points a gun at his head.
It was very strong, very powerful, and I was very afraid for him.
That night, Carol holds a psychic vigil. A powerful psychic tool she believes could stop Tyson Eford from being killed.
I recognize that my psychic abilities are gifts through God, and I ask and I pray for help. And I do it in the name of Jesus Christ, and it has never failed me, ever. Lord God, we ask at this time for the safe return of Tyson Eford, that there be no harm done to him, no harm to anyone involved. And we ask this now in the name of our Lord and Master, Jesus Christ.
The same night, around 2 a.m., Malvern police get an unexpected phone call. The Efords' prayers are answered.
I said, my name's Tyson Eford. I've been released.
Against all odds, Tyson Eford has been let go, released on a lonely stretch of highway just a mile from his house.
And he reached over to me and said, "Can we be friends?" Of course, I shook his hand to get out of the situation I was in. And I ran as fast as I could to the nearest house.
I didn't even stop in the road. I just went straight through the yard and went right up to the porch.
And then when I saw Tyson, I got out of the car. And so he grabbed Tyson, and I grabbed him, and of course I was crying and all upset, and I had my baby back.
Tyson's parents take him directly to the hospital. On the way, he talks about his abduction, a story that is both horrifying and chillingly familiar.
After I get Tyson in the unit, he and Anita was in the back seat. And he went and told me, he said, "Daddy, he raped me."
Tyson's story is so horrific. His parents are grateful that he's alive to tell it. But it's also so bizarre, the police are finding it hard to believe. A massive manhunt involving the FBI, state and local police, and hundreds of volunteers can't find 17-year-old Tyson Eford. But 6 days after his abduction, he's suddenly released in the middle of the night near his house.
This highway right here is Highway 9. This is where I was dropped off when I was released. And I ran to the nearest house down this road right here.
Like the family, the police are relieved and amazed Tyson is still alive. But the story he tells is so horrifying, it's hard for the police to accept.
Myself and an FBI agent interviewed him for about 5 hours. I needed more information to corroborate what he was telling us.
They said, there's no way he could have gone through what he went through and survived.
The police may be skeptical about Tyson's dark tale, but remarkably, it matches exactly with Carol Pate's psychic visions.
There was questions that I did ask him. I said, was there any guns? And he said they stuck it up to my head. They put a bullet in it, and they kept pulling the trigger. I said, Henry, that's what Carol told us about the Russian roulette.
I didn't know how she would know that. Only I would know that because I was the only one going through it.
What Tyson went through, I experienced to a lesser degree, but nevertheless I experienced it physically. I could feel it physically. That's why I would disconnect. It was extremely painful.
And then I asked him, I said, did one of them wear cowboy boots? And he said, yeah, Kevin Scott wore boots. And from the way I understood, she was seeing this through Tyson's eyes.
I saw the men, I saw the man in camouflage, I saw the belt buckle. But Tyson, I think being the son of police officers, took notice of everything around him.
To confirm Tyson's story and bring the kidnappers to justice, the police need to find the men fast. Tyson gives them a lead, a name he saw on a letter in the house where he was held. Within hours, 35-year-old Carl Meany is arrested. The psychic predicted that Carl Meany's house where Tyson was held was close to Ridge Road. In fact, it was a mere 500 yards.
It amazes me how close she was, how close she got to the house where I was.
Carl Meany's address confirms even more of Carol's visions. His house is small, white, and located in the country. And the route that Carol saw the kidnappers take leads right to the door.
There's 2 ways to go. But how did she know which road I was on? Why didn't she go somewhere in the city? It's amazing.
This is the crossroads off of Ridge Road, where Carol Pate lost the scent right here. She didn't know which way to go, either right that way or left that way. But they went left. If they would have went right, they would have went right to the house.
Meanie's address confirms Carol's psychic vision and how close she was to actually finding Tyson. Was she also right about him being in mortal danger? And how close did she come to saving his life? On the 5th day of his abduction, Tyson remembers Meanie tying him up and then leaving to go to town. He returns, edgy and upset, and tells Tyson,
Your pictures everywhere, all over the stores, all over the store I went to. Obviously, there's a lot of people looking for you. And I think it really freaked him out where he's going to have to do something today.
He was going to kill Tyson. That was my feeling.
Later that night, he took me out, and he had a gun, a pistol, on him. Walked across the pasture. I seen 3 holes.
I told the parents about the man taking him out and showing him the 3 graves.
I never prayed much before, and I just prayed to the Lord that he would not kill me.
When I realized that Tyson was going to die that night, I had to do something. I had to.
On the night of the 5th day of Tyson's abduction, Carol Pate holds her psychic prayer vigil.
Do I have your agreement for the safe return of Tyson Eford?
I agree.
I agree.
I said, please don't do this to me. Please don't kill me. He says, I've got to kill you.
Be released.
I said, I promise I will not tell anybody where I've been. Just please let me go.
In the name of our Lord and Master, Jesus Christ.
And then I guess something keyed, his conscience keyed into him, said, I'll let you go.
We're on the road right in front of Carl Meanie's house, where that night before he let me go, he took me across to a pasture out there where 3 holes were dug. I think he had every intentions to kill me, and I think something triggered in him where the Lord spoke to him and told him not to do this.
What did make Carl Meanie decide to spare Tyson and let him go? Whatever the truth, the Eford family believes it was the psychic's prayer circle.
And by Carol having the prayer circle, that's talking to God. I believe that that's what got him back to us safe.
Yes, the good Lord was looking over. Because those people were crazy enough to kill him.
I ask and I pray for help, and I do it in the name of Jesus Christ, and it has never failed me.
Tyson and his parents are amazed at the uncanny accuracy of Carol's psychic visions, but the police remain skeptical of Tyson's story until they get another bizarre surprise. The second kidnapper, Kevin Scott, turns himself in.
And then Scott, whenever he turned state evidence, it backed everything Tyson said.
It was a bizarre setup by Carl Meanie to use not only Tyson, but to use his own friend as part of his ploy.
Finally, Tyson's story of his abduction is fully confirmed. It was Scott who grabbed him at Knifepoint in the parking lot while Meanie drove. He was taken to a small white house in the country where the men played Russian roulette. Meanie had fooled Scott, telling him that Tyson was vandalizing his property and needed a scare. But after Scott left, the real reason Meanie had abducted Tyson became clear.
They're all playing tricks on Tyson, and Meanie's playing tricks on everybody else. Very, very bizarre man, Carl Meanie.
With the testimony of Tyson Eford and Kevin Scott, Carl Meanie receives 3 life sentences for the brutal kidnap and will spend the rest of his days in prison. Today, Tyson still lives in Malvern. He's married and drives a forklift for a living. He will never forget those 6 horrific days here on Ridge Road, nor a psychic's role in helping his family find him.
I don't know much about psychics, but I know that she gave my parents hope that I was still alive.
Tyson's alive. He's alive.
He was our only son, and she was going to do whatever she could to help us and to assure me that he was still alive.
She had been telling us the truth. She is somebody we'll never forget.
An innocent ride home takes a gruesome turn.
It was a crime of absolutely no logical reason.
A family's desperate search for their missing brother turns up nothing until a psychic 2,000 miles away tells them where to look.
This is where you have to go, and this is where you find your brother's vehicle.
She had a lot of details. She didn't get them from us. She didn't get them from the media.
But her visions make legal history.
There was total and complete silence during her testimony. Never heard anything like that before.
River Ridge, Louisiana, a small town on the banks of the Mississippi River, a suburb of New Orleans.
Pretty much people in River Ridge know each other pretty well. It's just sort of a small slice of American pie type of community. You wouldn't expect a person, particularly a hard-working carpenter, to suddenly disappear.
But in June of 1987, that's exactly what did happen. 27-year-old Andre Daigle vanished without a trace.
My mother called me Friday morning and told me that Andre was, missing and she hadn't heard from him. We're a close-knit family and very tight, and Andre wouldn't leave the pets without food or water, for one. And the other thing is, generally somebody would hear from him on a daily basis.
Andre's older brother Chris contacts the police immediately, but they're not convinced there's a problem and are slow to act.
The fact that he was a 27-year-old grown man, the police were like, what makes you think he's missing?
But the family believes something is very wrong and begin their own investigation, retracing his last steps.
Are you sure you haven't seen this guy?
The night he disappeared, he and Nick Shelley went to have dinner together, and then they went out to Mitchell's to shoot some pool.
Andre and his best friend Nick were playing pool for beers. Loser buys. Andre lost the first game, and at the bar he met a young woman who called herself Thelma.
And they chit-chatted, just making small talk, just both being patrons in there. When I talked to Nick about it, he tells me that he felt that she seemed to kind of hide her face, so he really didn't get a good look at her. It was a bit odd, but, that's just something you don't think about. I mean, these are the things you think about later, after they played a few games and had a few drinks. They were getting ready to leave, and that's when Thelma asked Andre for a ride home.
Andre agreed, and Nick Shelley went home separately in his own car. It's the last time he will ever see his best friend. 4 days pass and nothing. 2,000 miles away in California, Andre's sister Elise is desperate to help. A friend suggests she visit a psychic.
When she came to see me, Elise told me she had a brother that was missing. I just asked her if she brought a picture of her brother and a map with her, and she said yes.
Rosemary Kerr lives in Escondido, California. She claims she has a special talent for finding missing people. She'll need it. She's never been to Louisiana and never met the Daigle family.
When I go to the picture, I don't need to look at it because the minute I put my fingers on it, I get vibrations. So my fingers, say it's like somebody reading Braille. I'm making my connection. Everybody else is out.
The connection Rosemary makes is immediate and profound.
As I'm touching the picture, I'm seeing all these things behind my eyes. I was telling Elise how I see her brother in his dark vehicle, and she denied this. She says, no, he drives the little white car. But I needed to go with the dark car because this is what Andre was showing me.
Elise is not aware that her brother has recently bought a new vehicle, a black Ford pickup.
When Elise said, oh no, he has got a white car, I thank God that I had myself programmed that I do not listen to anybody else but only what comes in, whether it's right or wrong. I cannot change that.
Now Rosemary focuses on the map of Louisiana.
And as I run my finger along the maps, my fingers tell me where to stop. It's a vibration in my fingers. And I stopped, and I opened my eyes, and I asked Elise, I says, Elise, do you know this place? Do you recognize this? Right in here. And she says, this is Slidell. She says, I know it. I says, if you know this place, you have to do it now, do it quick. This is where you have to go, and this is where you find your brother's vehicle and find out where he is.
Slidell is 30 miles from the Daigle home in River Ridge. Chris and the family had just arrived back after a full day of searching. They were not prepared for what would happen next.
We were all in the kitchen with the maps laid out, trying to figure out, okay, where are we going to go tomorrow? What are we going to do? That's when the phone rang, and my mother got the call from Elise.
I just had a reading with the psychic here. And
she says, the lady says to go to Slidell. Well, man, when she said that, everybody in the room just got shook. You could feel goosebumps, and it was like a spirit had walked through there and touched you on the shoulder just to let you know, this is real. You got to go.
Within minutes, Chris and his family are racing towards Slidell, guided, they believe, by the spirit of their missing brother.
They went out in their vehicles to look for Andre. I told them to talk to Andre. And Elise said, why? I says, I want the open connection.
So we did, we knew he was frightened. We didn't know if he was alive or not. And we just wanted to reach out to him, and let him know that, his family was there. So.
Then, incredibly, there on the interstate, Chris spots Andre's truck ahead. The black pickup is heading towards Slidell, exactly where the psychic said it would be.
I actually kind of passed the truck up at first. I didn't even expect to see it, really, but drove up. Hey, was that it? Sure enough, that was it. Of course, we didn't recognize who was in the, driver's seat and who was in there driving it.
How could a psychic 2,000 miles away know where to find Andre's truck? But where is Andre? And who's at the wheel? In River Ridge, Louisiana, the mysterious disappearance of 27-year-old Andre Daigle has his family searching everywhere. 5 days pass without any success. Then, a California psychic 2,000 miles away points them in the right direction.
This is where you have to go, and this is where you find your brother's vehicle.
And sure enough, going down the interstate on our way to Slidell, and there was the truck. Of course, we didn't recognize who was in the driver's seat and who was in there driving it. So we decided at that point that we'd just kind of stick with them and see where they led us.
Chris tails the truck for nearly 30 minutes. Suddenly, the truck veers off the interstate and leads them down a deserted side road.
And there's no lights. It was pitch black out there. So I'm kind of sitting back about, I don't know, 50, 60 feet from where they were. Didn't want to get too close, but we wanted to stay close enough that if they left or did anything, we were there. They turned the truck around, facing back towards us, and then they killed the motor and turned the lights on. Well, that was very spooky, because now we knew that they knew we were following them. They drove by real slow and just kind of checked us out and looked at us, And as they got by, they took off. We just drove down that road not seconds before, and it was empty. Here we are 30 seconds later, we go down the same road, and who do we see? A police car.
As luck would have it, they ran across the only patrol car in the Pearl River area parked alongside the road that they were on.
We're all yelling, yeah, get that truck. Man, this is my brother, that's his truck, he's missing. you got to stop these guys. And that's when we got into like a high-speed chase.
When police forced the truck to pull over, they believe they're investigating a stolen vehicle. As police search the truck, they find both guns and ammunition.
We didn't care about them. We didn't care about the truck. We didn't care about anything. We just wanted to know where was Andre. So I kind of walked up a little bit closer, and I asked him, I said, where's my brother? You know, what'd you do with my brother? Where is he? Well, of course, they wouldn't answer.
But where is Andre? 2,000 miles away in California, psychic Rosemary Kerr believes she knows the answer.
When I felt myself holding my head and basically speaking louder and louder and louder because I could feel the pain, and I started yelling to Elise, my head is killing me. And as I felt that, I went into, I want to say, a different mode, because I knew that I was looking for somebody that had already left the earth plane.
But Rosemary withholds this piece of information.
Elise did not ask if her brother was alive or dead. I am just the conductor of the words. I'm just a channel. But in order for it to be done the proper way, it has to go through the proper channels. It's for the authorities.
And the authorities were working fast. They identified the two men as 24-year-old Charles Gervais of New Orleans and 21-year-old Michael Phillips of Kenner. The two are brought in on weapons and stolen vehicle charges.
These two were not new to crime.
Captain James Gallagher of the Kenner Police Department is one of the officers in charge of the investigation.
The chief and his officers began interviewing Charles Gervais and Michael Phillips as to how they came in possession of the truck.
At first, Gervais isn't talking, but under questioning, his friend Michael Phillips eventually cracks. He describes a senseless, brutal murder, a murder committed, he says, by Gervais.
Once Charles realized that Mike was talking to the authorities, he demanded to speak to him, wanted to get the record straight. They talked about how they had Andre brought back to their apartment with Thelma. At some point they retrieve a claw hammer out of Andre's truck. Then they take turns beating him with his own claw hammer.
The killer's motive was more extraordinary than even the police could have imagined.
The question was asked, why would you kill Andre? What was the purpose behind it? And Gervais tells me this story about hearing about a prostitution ring somewhere in Texas. And him and Mike decide, well, we don't want to work for a living. We'll just go to Texas and we'll kill whoever's running this operation, and we'll take it over, and the women will work for us. So they decide, well, if we're going to do this, we have to know before we get involved that we can actually take a life. So they come up with the scheme of sending Thelma out to bars and to look for someone, anyone, whoever she brings home, that person's going to die. And unfortunately, in this case, the person she brought home was Andre.
Andre Daigle was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, picked at random and killed as a dress rehearsal for a gangland hit, his body dumped in a swamp.
Gervais showed no remorse. He wasn't sorry that he did anything. Didn't bother him, that he had destroyed a family, and taken away someone's son.
Once police recover the body, both men are charged with first-degree murder, and a warrant goes out for their accomplice, 21-year-old Thelma Horn of Kenner. Now police have to inform the family of their worst fear. Their youngest son, Andre, is dead.
I never dreamed he would be dead. We needed to believe he was alive. We needed to believe that we could find him. We needed to believe that, that we could help him. And so we really thought we were. We thought we were going to find him alive. I thought we were, but it didn't work out that way. But at least we were able to find him and find the people who committed the crime.
But this case is far from over. Even with a confession, both men could still plead not guilty in court.
if the defendant doesn't take the stand and doesn't testify on his own behalf, you cannot use his statement against him.
In Louisiana, a not guilty plea can lead to the death penalty. Gervais sees the writing on the wall, admits his guilt, and is sentenced to life in prison. But Thelma Horn and Michael Phillips roll the dice. They plead not guilty and opt for a trial.
I think Michael was more concerned about consequences. He knew that we already pretty much had the whole story of what occurred, but he wanted to try and downplay his participation.
Gallagher needs as much evidence as possible. When he learns from Chris that it was a psychic's vision that led them to Andre's truck and exposed their killers, he reluctantly gives her a call.
You know, I deal with facts. I deal with things, you know, tangible things. And up until that point, I was still trying to figure out, you know, what the angle was. How did this happen?
Hello?
It was a phone call that would change a cop and make courtroom history.
There was total and complete silence during her testimony. Never heard anything like that before.
In Louisiana, the disappearance of a 27-year-old carpenter, Andre Daigle, has ended in murder. A California psychic has helped the Daigle family and police track down the killers. Now the police must work with a psychic to make sure the suspects are locked away forever.
Well, I learned that the way these people were actually caught was a tip from a psychic, a lady named Rosemarie Kerr, who lived in California.
When Captain Gallagher contacts Rosemarie, she recounts the details of her reading with Andre's sister.
It's like I'm into Andre's vibration, getting more and more headaches coming in very, very strongly.
Well, she was talking about, I'm feeling pain to my head right now as I'm handling his photograph. I already knew from the investigation that Andre had been beaten with a hammer.
The autopsy revealed that Andre had been struck 10 times in the head.
She talks about where the body's at and where Andre's at.
I could see and also feel a freeway or a roadway that was to my right and high above me. I knew there was a railroad track to the other side. I knew there was marshes there. The number 7 kept coming in and coming in very strongly.
When Gallagher travels back to the location where Daigle's body was found, he's amazed at the psychic's accuracy.
We got off on exit number 7 right down the road to get here. As Rose told me during my interview with her, she described a long bridge, and what we have behind me here is Interstate 55, which runs for about 24 miles, elevated through the swamp. She indicated there'd be water all around Andre. Well, here we are, next to the swamp here. She had a lot of details that no other way she could have gotten them. She didn't get them from us. She didn't get them from the media, and it just, I was amazed, but I became a believer after talking with her.
He was kind of flabbergasted because he had never worked with a psychic before, and he wanted to know how I knew all these things. But what was so lovely about him, he's accepted me for who I was. He questioned me very, very thoroughly, wanting to know how I work and how I know it. And though I could feel skepticism at first, he, as we talked and talked and talked, he accepted the fact because he was able to verify the information that was given to him.
You have to be a believer because there's no other, there's no explanation for what she gave him other than that she has a gift.
But could a psychic's visions hold up in a court of law? W.J. LeBlanc, a Louisiana district attorney, thinks Rosemarie's testimony is key.
When I first took the case, I really didn't have an expectation that the psychic would testify. I read through the file. It was almost too fantastic to believe in terms of what role she played in the apprehension of these individuals. But I did want to meet her to verify that that is exactly what happened, which was what was in the report. When I met with her and we discussed exactly what she did and how it did, I realized how compelling it was and that the jury really needed to hear it. The jury needed to hear why the family left River Ridge and drove to Slidell and how they just happened to run across their missing family member's truck with the killers in it. From an evidentiary standpoint, there were some people in the office who were skittish about using a psychic during a trial. My position was that she was a fact witness, and based upon what she saw, someone else relayed that information to someone else, which led to the arrest of the defendants.
The brutal and bizarre murder of Andre Daigle makes front-page news, but what really grabs headlines is the psychic.
This case, in many ways, was sort of a bellwether case in establishing psychic involvement as an important forensic tool in conducting investigations in cases that were very difficult.
Richard Boyd was the court reporter at the Daigle trial.
In my 10 years of covering courts, it was the most amazing, astounding chain of circumstances that I ever ran across.
It would be the first time in U.S. legal history that a psychic would take the stand and describe how her visions helped to solve a murder.
Well, I had never been on a witness stand, and I would be the first in doing this work as a psychic testifying, but I didn't feel any qualms, no pressures or anything. It felt like it was the normal thing to do.
February 2nd, 1988, 1 year after the murder, the state presents its case to a packed courtroom. W.J. LeBlanc, the DA, outlines for the jury the gruesome details of Andre Daigle's last hours. On the night of June 9th, 1987, Andre Daigle was playing pool with his best friend, Nick Shelley. At the bar, he meets a young woman, Thelma Horn. She later asks for a lift home. Inside the apartment, Charles Gervais and Michael Phillips ambush Andre, attacking him with a hammer taken from a toolbox in his truck. Their botched murder finally ended when the two men used a vacuum cord to strangle Andre to death. They wrapped his body in a curtain and hid him in the back of a couch. The following night, they dumped his body in a swampy marsh below the causeway. The evidence against the two men is compelling. Now the DA calls the psychic to the witness stand to help seal the prosecution case.
You could hear a pin drop in that courtroom. I mean, people were just enraptured by it, just totally focused on her.
Thank you. There's an old
Rosemary Kerr tells the jury how her vision led the Daigles to Andre's missing truck.
You know, the emotion, it was just a chill went through the room.
At the close of the state's case, faced with the evidence, Michael Phillips changes his plea to guilty.
He was headed straight for the electric chair. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury was hanging on every word of every witness, from Rosemary to Chris Daigle to Nick Shelley. Even someone as slow as Michael Phillips, I think, could sense that this was heading to the direction where he was not going to like.
Without that information provided by Rose, which eventually led to the arrest, he would have been possibly another John Doe, unsolved homicide.
In a separate trial, the killer's accomplice Thelma Horn is found guilty of second-degree murder. With the help of the psychic's testimony, all three are serving life sentences.
That was the first time that a psychic had ever testified in a criminal trial. And to my knowledge, I don't think that one ever has testified since. It was a fairly unique set of circumstances that led to her testifying in the trial. Because Andre Daigle was a very special young man, and there was just this feel about the trial that everything was coming together to see that Andre's killers were brought to justice. And I think that Rosemary's testimony was a big part of that.
I feel that this whole scenario wasn't in our hands, but in a higher power, and we all just did our job. And I have to give credit to the departments that work with people like me and realize if we can give them just one little piece of the puzzle, and that could help them, that's what we're about.
The Daigle family was devastated, to this day is still devastated to a large extent by this senseless crime. Andre Daigle, a promising young man who was hardworking, lost his life for absolutely no reason, for no discernible, clear reason.
Andre was a great brother. You know, if you ever needed his help, he was there for you. You know, he was just a wonderful guy, thoughtful, kind, gentle. You know, after the funeral, people would just walk up to me, you know, guys we went to high school with, you know. I mean, 100 guys came to me and said, Andre was my best friend. I'm going to miss Andre. He was my best friend. I mean, he was everybody's best friend, you know. I mean, that's quite impressive, you know, to hear that from people. You know, his life was cut so short, I don't know if he had time to even figure that out. Here's Rosemarie, you know, a little lady living out there in California, you know, 2,000 miles away from us. Think that someone has that ability, you know, to make contact and into the spirit world like that and able to help, but she's connected.
When his daughter disappears, a desperate father turns to a psychic for answers.
She's passed.
The psychic tells him she's already dead.
My mind just didn't want to accept it.
But detectives are skeptical.
As a detective, I have to look at hard, plain facts.
But as her visions begin to ring true, they bring a warning.
How's she in trouble?
I really feel panic.
Same guy that killed Stacy is going to kill again.
Can the psychic lead police to a killer before it's too late? July 22nd, 1992. In Tempe, Arizona, a suburb of Phoenix. College student Stacy Hendrickson disappears from her apartment without a trace. She was just 21. For her father back home in Ohio, it's the worst thing he can imagine.
I never ever thought I'd have to face this kind of thing in my life. My mind just didn't want to accept it. And then finally when it hit me, I just, like I say, my knees buckled and I just fell in the chair.
In Arizona, Stacy was going to college, away from home for the first time. A compassionate, caring young woman, Stacy was training to help children with diabetes, a condition she herself suffered from. If she's still alive, her disease may be her worst enemy.
There's a time element involved, and it's very serious. She's probably got approximately 48 hours before she'd go into insulin coma.
Tempe, Arizona detective Alan Reed is placed in charge of the investigation. He begins at her apartment, where she was last seen.
We knew that Stacy was missing and that she was diabetic, and I found inside the refrigerator her insulin, which she needed to take. And we thought that she would have taken that with her if she had gone voluntarily with someone. But it was obvious that there had been some type of force used, as we had two forced open doors.
Stacy's roommate Virginia was at her mother's the night Stacy disappeared. She provides a list of friends for police to talk to. Reed hopes one of them will know where Stacy is. But back in Ohio, 2,000 miles from the investigation, Stacy's father can't just sit back and wait. A neighbor convinces him to talk to a psychic.
Hi, I'm Molly.
Hi, Neil. I felt some desperation in his voice that kind of made me realize that whether he was skeptical or not, he was at wit's end.
Gail St. John claims she can see and feel things that most of us cannot. Her gift has helped to find other missing children. Maybe she could find Stacy.
When I started looking at Stacy's picture, and I was just kind of, just picking up vibrations between looking at the picture and feeling Raleigh, and just kind of, and all of a sudden, just, it was so fast, Stacy was next to me. And I kind of took Raleigh's hand and said to him, I have to tell you something. Stacy's gone.
And I just, kind of a lump in my throat. And she starts describing an area.
I'm seeing this building that's...
saying that there's a small building about probably 12 by 14. And she said there's water real close by.
What does it all mean? Could Stacy be showing Gail where to find her body?
Then I looked down, straight down, and the dirt was cracked. And I had never seen anything like this before.
She was like in her own little world, but if she wasn't in no trance, she just basically was walking around the room just talking. I started thinking that she's actually right there.
But Gail St. John is picking up more than just visions.
Along with voice and showing me pictures, that she was impressing with feelings. It was almost like rope or something around the wrist, and I really felt that hot burning when it went into me. I actually saw everything just go black around me.
Gail believes Stacy was murdered, bound and shot in the back of the head.
But there's a lot of things you try not to go into as far as those details.
Whether she was real, it was an act, whether having the skepticism that I had, and being 2,000 miles away or 1,800 miles away, I just didn't know. I couldn't say it was for real or it wasn't at that point in time. Later on, that's a different story, but right then
Back in Tempe, Arizona, Detective Reed's investigation continues. He has few leads, but forensics have unearthed one important clue. Whoever forced their way into Stacy's apartment left fingerprints behind. Maybe someone in Stacy's apartment complex saw something.
Have you heard anything unusual in the last several hours?
No.
Reed gets lucky. Stacy's neighbor across the hall witnessed the break-in.
Pushing on the door and banging on the door.
Who was this mysterious intruder? Did he kill Stacy as the psychic believes? The disappearance of a 21-year-old college student in Tempe, Arizona sends a desperate father to a psychic. But what she sees, he doesn't want to hear. She tells him his daughter is already dead. But police believe Stacy Hendrickson has been abducted and could still be alive. Now they've found a witness who could lead them to Stacy.
He hears the sound of steps coming up to this second-floor apartment. And as he is awake, he hears some pounding on the door. So he looks through the peephole and he sees this young white male, approximately 25 years old, banging on the door.
Banging on it, and there's no answer or anything, so finally
he tries forcing open the door with his shoulder, with his hands, and then does a little drop kick and then makes entry. What concerned me is the neighbor doesn't call the police. Told me that it was his opinion that this was a boyfriend-girlfriend dispute. He didn't want to get involved. He told me that the person that entered was a white male, clean-cut looking, and was wearing a very distinctive black T-shirt. And he said that this had on it a skull.
In Ohio, Roland is desperate to find out anything about his daughter, so he calls Detective Reed and tells him about Gail St. John and her strange visions. At first, his request falls upon deaf ears.
I considered psychics and stuff that they did, the word I use is mumbo-jumbo. As a cop, I have to look at hard, plain facts. And so, as a courtesy, and it was a courtesy to Raleigh, we contacted Gail St. John.
Would this be the phone call that would change the course of Detective Reed's investigation?
I was so busy, and I was so not wanting to waste my time. I gave Gail's number to a partner that was working this case with me. I asked him to call.
I kind of felt the skepticism.
Gail tells Reed's partner where they'll find Stacy's body. She describes palm trees to the south, a chain-link fence, cracked dirt, a small corrugated shed with a slanted roof, and then she tells the detective something she hasn't told Roland. Gail believes Stacy was murdered, shot in the back of the head.
When I first told him that you're dealing with a murder rather than an abduction, he was kind of hesitant.
But Detective Reed is not about to turn his missing persons investigation into a homicide based on the word of someone who claims to talk to dead people.
The information she had given to us was useless. It didn't lead us anywhere. We couldn't put that information out on a police radio or even begin to look anywhere. And at this point, we don't even have a body. We don't even have a victim.
You know, there is really no convincing someone that you're right or you're wrong. You have to let things fall into place. If I tell you something and then later it happens, then it fell into place, now you understand, you believe.
2 days later, after the call, something does happen. Something that will change Reed's skepticism forever. A city worker finds a body in a dumpster next to the Tempe Canal.
This was just another routine, if you will, death call for me. But as I drove down that canal road, I start to remember, all right, now, Gail said it was near water. Well, the canal's full of water. I get out of my police car and I see palm trees to the south. I look down and I'm walking on cracked earth. And oh my gosh, I see a rolling machine, which is a conveyor belt. And this machine specifically removes debris from the canal as it floats down and places that debris into a dumpster. The hair on the back of my neck was just standing straight up because everything that Gail had told the police, it was like a picture. It couldn't be a better match.
When police remove the body, it's so badly decomposed from the hot sun and water that a photo ID is impossible. Was the psychic right? Is Stacy dead, and could this be her body? The disappearance of a 21-year-old college student sends her father to a psychic. Gail St. John tells him his daughter is already dead. Police believe she could still be alive, but when a body is discovered in a canal, just as the psychic predicted, the lead detective begins to take her visions seriously.
Even though I could not make a positive ID of her at that point, based on what Gail said, in my heart I knew that this was Stacy Hendrickson.
One other clue convinces Reed the body is Stacy's. Something Gail St. John said.
And as I picked Stacy's body up, I could see that she had ligature marks on her wrists and that she had been bound. And she was x-rayed, and it was apparent from the x-ray that she had been shot in the head. And at that point, I became somewhat of a convert to the information and the gift or the ability that Gail St. John had.
A hard-boiled detective is now a believer, and with a killer on the loose, he wonders what else Gail St. John knows. Can the psychic really help the cop find Stacy's killer?
I can't tell you how astounded I am. I do have a killer out there, and the information you gave us was accurate.
I think he, at that point, dropped his skepticism and was more open to saying, okay, now I see what you said was right. Where do we go from here?
The next day, Stacy's father flies to Arizona to help ID the body of his daughter. He has yet to see how accurate Gail was.
I was hoping it wasn't Stacy. That's what my guts was saying.
Still waiting for dental records to make a positive ID, Detective Reed shows Roland 3 earrings that he recovered from the body.
I'd bought her 3 diamond studs, and they graduated from small to a medium to a little bit bigger. And She was minus an ear on the one side, but this ear had these 3 diamonds in it. And that was a very identifying thing to me.
Detective Reed takes Roland to the bleak spot where his daughter was found.
When we got there, he was amazed. He was amazed at what he saw, that were really exactly as Gail had said.
I drill on that constantly. To have to come and find your daughter or your son in a situation like this where they wind up basically, dumped in a dumpster like garbage. It's pretty hard to take. It just...
Once we had recovered Stacy's body, I can't begin to describe the pressure then that begins.
Just as Gail St. John predicted, Detective Reed has a homicide on his hands. Reed now follows up on dozens of leads, but none lead to a suspect. The psychic was right about where Stacy's body would be found and the terrible way in which she died. Days after discovering the body, Reed gets a disturbing call from Gail.
I really feel panic. I feel panic.
She says the killer is about to strike again.
The same guy that killed Stacy is going to kill again. Who's he going to kill? Virginia. I mean, she's real specific.
I'm feeling terrible panic now. Stacy's just going wild here, trying to describe what's happening and what's going to happen, and the roommate's life is in danger. She's going to go see this guy, and she's just going so fast. I'm trying to absorb it, and of course, the detectives are you still there? Yeah, but I'm trying to listen to your conversation and hers. And sometimes you feel like you're halfway between two worlds.
And part of me goes, this is pretty outlandish. The other part of me says, you know what? I can't disregard it. Look what happened when we went to the scene and found all those things she said.
Reed heeds Gail's warning and asks Virginia, Stacy's roommate, to come down to the station. Gail has also told him that Virginia knows the killer and is reluctant to make him a suspect.
And about an hour ago. And then I look at her in the eyes, and I said, I just got a call from Gail St. John. And she says that the same person who took the life of your friend is going to kill you tonight.
In Tempe, Arizona, a missing persons case has become a full-scale homicide investigation. Eerily, psychic Gail St. John predicted that 21-year-old Stacy Hendrickson had been murdered days before police found her body. Now, Gail is warning police that the killer is about to kill again. She says that Stacy's spirit has told her that the next victim will be her roommate, Virginia.
I tell her that Stacy's father had contacted a lady who has a gift. And as I'm talking to Virginia, I'm placing the Polaroids in front of her. And then I look at her in the eyes, and I said, I just got a call from Gail St. John. And she says that the same person who took the life of your friend is going to kill you tonight. And when I said those words, the blood drained out of her face. She turned white, and she teared up. And I'll never forget, she immediately said to me, check out John, check out John.
John Adams is a 26-year-old manager of a local fast food restaurant. Adams met both Stacy and her roommate just a few weeks before Stacy was killed. Incredibly, Virginia has a date with him that very night. With no time to lose, Reed tracks down Adams at his workplace. If Gail is right, this man's prints should match the set left on Stacy's door.
He was very cordial, and he was very cooperative. He told me that he knew Stacy. He told me that he was dating Virginia. I saw no sign of emotion from him. I asked him if he could assist me in the investigation by allowing me to take his photograph and also to take a sample of his fingerprints.
The prints turn out to be a perfect match, but that's not enough to charge Adams. There's no murder weapon and nothing as yet that links him to the shooting.
And Gail St. John she's done her job, and it's now my job to build a factual case of things that people understand in court that I can use to put him away.
Reed's hard work finally pays off. Adams does own a skull t-shirt that matches the one the neighbor saw the man banging on Stacy's door wearing. Not only that, but it turns out that Adams had recently bought a gun, the same caliber as the murder weapon. Armed with the new evidence, Reed pulls Adams in for questioning. Once again, Gail St. John's eerie predictions are confirmed.
So everything is now just adding up. Everything points to John Adams. And I need to convince him to make this right, to tell the truth. We began the interview and talking about, really, John. In the back of my mind is a warning that I received from Gail St. John. And she has told me I need to be very careful with him. John is full of rage and anger, but she tells me that he can change from this nice, courteous young man to a raging bull. I need you to know that. And at a certain point in the interview, I could tell that John was ready to talk. John began to weep. He did tell me at that point that he did kill Stacy Hendrickson. He did what? That this was a murder, and I would have to charge him with a murder. In the twinkling of an eye, and becomes this raging bull and attacks me. No! No! Again, what Gail St. John had said was true. This man attacked me.
John Adams is charged with the murder of Stacy Hendrickson, and he eventually makes a full confession. In court, the final terrible moments of Stacy's last night alive were revealed. On July 22nd at 2 a.m., Adams arrived at Stacy's apartment, fueled on drugs and alcohol. He banged on the door, kicked it in, and chased Stacy into the bedroom. There he shot her in the back of the head, her pillow muffling the sound of the bullet and the bedsheets catching the spray of blood. Adams then wrapped her body in the blood-stained sheets and dumped the evidence in the Tempe Canal. Days later, it was siphoned from the water and deposited in a dumpster, the exact location described by Gail St. John.
I went on to work homicide almost 10 years, and in those 10 years, I never, ever dealt again with someone like Gail St. John.
Stacy saved her roommate's life. That's what it boils down to. If she hadn't said it to me, if she hadn't got that across to me, then we would have had another murder.
In court, Adams pleads guilty to manslaughter and is sentenced to 29 years in jail.
I feel you'd have to be a little crazy to do something like that, but I don't know how they feel. What promotes them thoughts to do things like that to some innocent person? After all, she was in her room bed, sleeping. She wasn't bothering anybody.